It's said that growing old is not for the faint of heart. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes the deepest wounds come from those who are supposed to love us most. My name is Dorothy Taylor, and for 67 years I believed that dedication to family would eventually be rewarded with loyalty and appreciation. I was wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The day I realized my son and his wife saw me as a burden, rather than a blessing, wasn't when they stopped visiting regularly, or when they forgot my birthday 3 years in a row. It was the afternoon they drove me to Golden Acres Retirement Community and checked me in on my 68th birthday. "Mom, this is for the best," my son James said, his eyes fixed on the carpeted floor of the facility's reception area. "You'll have professional care here, people to talk to, activities." His wife Patricia nodded emphatically. "And honestly, Dorothy, we're just not equipped to help you anymore. The house has all those stairs, and with Jim's promotion and the kids' schedules." What they carefully avoided mentioning was the $2.8 million in assets I controlled, the downtown property I owned outright, or the fact that I'd been subsidizing their lavish lifestyle for the past decade. That's when I understood with crystal clarity. I was worth more to them as a signature on financial documents than as a mother or grandmother. That was the moment I decided that if they wanted to treat me like a footnote in their lives, then perhaps they deserved to be treated the same way in my will. What happened next changed everything. For them, and especially for me. I never expected my retirement years to unfold this way. At 68, I thought I'd be hosting Sunday dinners in my historic Victorian home on Maple Avenue, tending to my prize-winning roses, and occasionally babysitting my grandchildren, Andrew and Sophie. Instead, I found myself in room 237 of Golden Acres, surrounded by beige walls, generic furniture, and the faint smell of antiseptic that couldn't quite mask the underlying scent of old age and institutional living. My journey began in Pinewood, a charming town just large enough to have its own community theater, but small enough that the cashiers at Palmer's Grocery still knew most customers by name. I'd spent 42 years teaching English at Pinewood High School, inspiring generations of students to appreciate literature and clear writing. My late husband, Harold, had been the town's most respected accountant until a stroke took him when James was in college. Harold and I had been careful with money our entire lives. We'd purchased our Victorian home on Maple Avenue when it was in disrepair, spending weekends scraping wallpaper and refinishing hardwood floors. Over 30 years, we'd transformed it into one of the most admired properties in town. Harold had also made shrewd investments in local real estate, including a small commercial building downtown that housed 3 successful businesses. "We're building a legacy for James," Harold would say as we reviewed our finances each month at the kitchen table, "making sure he'll never struggle the way we did starting out." James had been our only child, born after years of trying. From the moment he arrived, he became the center of our universe. When he showed an aptitude for numbers, Harold spent hours teaching him financial concepts beyond his years. When he expressed interest in baseball, I drove him to practices and games across 3 counties. We scrimped on our own pleasures to send him to private university when his grades weren't quite scholarship-worthy. The morning I helped James move into his freshman dorm at Westridge University was one of the proudest days of my life. He was the first in our family to attend such a prestigious school. "I'll make you proud, Mom," he'd said, hugging me goodbye. The memory of those words now felt like salt in an open wound. James met Patricia during his junior year. She was studying fashion marketing, came from a wealthy family in Springdale, and had a taste for luxury that was immediately apparent. The first time James brought her home during spring break, she'd looked around our lovingly restored Victorian, with barely concealed disappointment. "It has character," she'd said, eyeing the vintage wallpaper in the foyer. "Though I imagine the heating bills must be astronomical." I'd tried to warm to her over dinner, asking about her studies and family. "Daddy owns Harrington Development," she'd replied, naming a well-known luxury real estate company. "We've always lived in new construction, much more efficient." By dessert, she'd managed to mention her family's vacation home in Florida twice, and asked if our neighborhood had always been so modest. I'd caught James wincing at her comments but saying nothing. When Harold suffered his stroke 2 years later, just months after James and Patricia's wedding, our world changed overnight. Suddenly, I was a widow at 57, lost and grieving. James had just started a position at a financial services firm in Springdale, about 45 minutes from Pinewood. "Move to Springdale, Mom," James had suggested during one of his hospital visits to see his father. "Sell the house. You don't need all that space, and the money would help with your retirement." I had been hurt by the suggestion. The house wasn't just a structure. It contained 30 years of memories, Harold's presence in every carefully restored corner. "This is our home," I'd told him gently. "Your father would want me to stay." Harold passed away 2 weeks later. The life insurance provided enough to pay off what little remained of our mortgage, but not much beyond that. I returned to teaching, finding comfort in my classroom and students while adjusting to life alone. James and Patricia's visits became increasingly infrequent as they established their life in Springdale. When they did visit, Patricia often spent the time scrolling through her phone or making not-so-subtle comments about the quaint town of Pinewood and how they could never live in such a limited environment. They had purchased a home in Lakeshore Estates, the most expensive neighborhood in Springdale, stretching themselves financially in ways that made me nervous. 4 years after Harold's death, I retired from teaching at 61. The pension was decent, but not lavish. However, the commercial property downtown had appreciated significantly and provided steady rental income. Between that, my pension, and Social Security, I was comfortable. I spent my days volunteering at the library, attending my garden club, and occasionally traveling with my friend Elaine to visit historic sites along the East Coast. Then came the first request. James called one evening as I was deadheading my roses. "Mom, I hate to ask, but we're in a bit of a situation." "What's wrong, James?" My mind immediately went to health concerns, accidents, grandchildren in trouble. The property taxes on the house came in higher than we expected, and with private school tuition for Andrew and Sophie both. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He paused. "We're about $12,000 short this quarter." Without hesitation, I offered to help. He was my only child, and Harold had always said we were building a legacy for him. Within the hour, I had transferred the money from my savings. This became a pattern over the next few years. The expenses were always presented as temporary emergencies: unexpected house repairs, a new car when Patricia's died without warning, private tennis camps for the grandchildren, a home theater system that was an investment in family togetherness. Each time, I withdrew money from my savings. Each time, James promised to pay me back when his year-end bonus came through or when a particular investment matured. Each time, the repayment was forgotten, and the calls of gratitude grew shorter and less frequent. For my 65th birthday, I had hoped they might plan something special. Instead, I received a text message from Patricia. "Happy birthday from all of us. So sorry we can't make it up this weekend. Andrew has a tournament and Sophie has a sleepover she can't miss. We'll celebrate next time we see you." That, next. Time didn't come for 3 months, and when it did, it wasn't to celebrate my birthday, but to discuss what they called concerns about my living situation. "Mom, we've been thinking," James began as we sat in my sun-drenched kitchen. "This house is really too big for you now. All these stairs, the maintenance." "I'm managing fine," I assured him, pouring tea into the china cups that had been a wedding gift to Harold and me. "Mrs. Peterson's son does the heavy yard work, and I have a cleaning service come in twice a month. Patricia exchanged a glance with James. But you're not getting any younger, Dorothy. What happens if you fall? You're here all alone. I have friends who check on me regularly, I pointed out, and I'm in good health. My doctor says I have the constitution of someone 10 years younger. Still, James persisted, wouldn't it make sense to sell now while the market is good? You could get a nice condo in Springdale, closer to us and the grandkids. What went unsaid, but what I understood perfectly well, was that selling my home would free up capital that they assumed would eventually benefit them. The commercial property downtown was apparently not enough. I changed the subject then, asking about Andrew's baseball team and Sophie's dance recitals, but the conversation had left me uneasy. For the first time, I started to question James and Patricia's motives in their concerns for my welfare. The requests for financial assistance continued and grew larger. When James called to ask for $30,000 to renovate their master bathroom, the original fixtures are embarrassing when Patricia's friends visit, I finally hesitated. James, that's a significant amount. I'd need to think about it. His tone immediately cooled. Of course, Mom. Take your time. I just thought since you're sitting on all that property value doing nothing with it. After that conversation, the already infrequent visits from James, Patricia, and my grandchildren became even rarer. When I did see them, Patricia was distant, and James seemed impatient, checking his watch and finding reasons to cut visits short. The children, now teenagers, were glued to their devices, barely acknowledging me beyond mumbled greetings. Then I broke my hip. It happened on a Tuesday in March, a simple misstep on a patch of late winter ice on my front walk. My neighbor, Frank Thompson, heard my cry and called the ambulance. The surgery went well, but recovery would require physical therapy and temporary mobility limitations. James and Patricia visited me in the hospital exactly once, arriving late and leaving early. James seemed distracted, Patricia annoyed at the inconvenience. Neither asked about my recovery plan or offered to help. When the discharge planner mentioned I would need assistance at home for several weeks, they exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. 2 days later, on the morning of my 68th birthday, they arrived at the hospital without warning. Patricia was carrying a small potted orchid. James had a folder of papers. Good news, Mom, he announced with forced cheerfulness. We've found the perfect solution. There's an opening at Golden Acres. They can take you today. Golden Acres? I echoed, confused. The retirement home on County Line Road? It's a retirement community, Patricia corrected, emphasizing each syllable as if speaking to a child. Very upscale. They have physical therapists on staff who can help with your recovery. And then you can just stay. Stay? I repeated, the implications slowly dawning on me. You mean live there? Permanently? James nodded, already pulling papers from his folder. We've toured it. It's quite nice. They have activities, dining options. But my house, I interrupted. My garden. My things. We can help you downsize, Patricia offered brightly. Decide what will fit in your new apartment. The rest we can sell or donate or... She trailed off, and I caught another meaningful glance between them. Or you could keep for yourselves, I finished quietly. James had the grace to look momentarily ashamed before rallying. We're just thinking of what's best for you, Mom. You can't manage alone in that big house anymore. And the upkeep costs. I'm managing the costs just fine, I said firmly. And I'll only need help temporarily while my hip heals. I've already arranged for a home health aide through my insurance. We've already put down the deposit, James said, his tone hardening. It's non-refundable. And frankly, Mom, we don't think you're being realistic about your situation. What followed was a conversation that still burns in my memory. My son and his wife presenting a united front against me, armed with phrases like aging-in-place challenges and liability concerns, and most tellingly, financial practicality. The house and downtown property should be sold, James stated flatly. The proceeds would more than cover Golden Acres for the rest of your life, with plenty left for your legacy. My legacy. The euphemism hung in the air between us. What they meant was their inheritance. In that moment, looking at my son, Harold's son, I felt something break inside me. Not my heart, exactly. Something deeper. The fundamental belief that my child valued me beyond what I could provide materially. The trust that the sacrifices Harold and I had made would be honored with basic respect, if not gratitude. I signed the admission papers, not because I agreed with their assessment, not because I wanted to move to Golden Acres, but because in that moment, I needed to understand exactly how far they were willing to go, what they truly valued, and where I actually stood in their lives. That afternoon, my 68th birthday, James and Patricia drove me directly from the hospital to Golden Acres. They spent exactly 27 minutes helping me settle into room 237, hanging 3 outfits in the small closet, placing my medications on the bathroom counter, and setting up a framed photo of Harold on the bedside table. No birthday cake, no card, not even an acknowledgement of the date's significance. "We'll bring more of your things next week," James promised, already edging toward the door. "And we'll visit on Sunday," Patricia added, adjusting her designer handbag on her shoulder. "Of course," I said quietly. "Thank you for all your help." As the door closed behind them, I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed in the sterile room and looked out the window at the carefully manicured grounds of Golden Acres. For the first time since Harold's death, I allowed myself to cry, not from sadness, but from clarity. The veil had been lifted. I saw my relationship with James and Patricia exactly as it was, transactional, rooted not in love, but in expectation of gain. They had miscalculated badly, however. In their eagerness to help me into a retirement home, they had overlooked several key facts. First, while I had given them access to my checking account for emergencies, they had no legal control over my assets. Second, neither my house nor the commercial property was in James's name in any capacity. And third, perhaps most critically, they had underestimated my resilience, intelligence, and capacity for strategic thinking. Traits that had made me not just a successful teacher, but also Harold's trusted partner in building our modest empire. That evening, as I picked at the bland chicken and overcooked vegetables that constituted dinner at Golden Acres, I made a decision. I would use this situation not as a defeat, but as an opportunity, a chance to rebuild my life on my terms, to redefine relationships based on genuine care rather than financial expectation, and to ensure that Harold's legacy and mine would ultimately serve worthwhile purposes. The next morning, I called Martin Green, the attorney who had handled Harold's estate and our wills. His response to my situation was refreshingly direct. "They did what?" he exclaimed, after I explained the circumstances of my relocation to Golden Acres. "On your birthday? Without prior discussion?" "Precisely," I confirmed. "Dorothy, this is, well, frankly, it's concerning. Do you want to contest this? Because if you're being held somewhere against your will, I'm not contesting it yet," I clarified. "For now, I want to make some changes to my estate plan, significant changes, and I need your help with something else as well." Martin agreed to visit me that afternoon. As I waited, I took stock of my new surroundings. Golden Acres was, objectively speaking, a pleasant facility. Clean, well-staffed, with spacious common areas and decent amenities. But it wasn't home. It wasn't where I had planned to spend my remaining years. And it certainly wasn't a place I had chosen, freely. At precisely 2 o'clock, Martin arrived, leather portfolio in hand. Always punctual, always prepared. Qualities that had made him Harold's preferred attorney decades ago. "Let's start with your current will," he said after settling into the room's single visitor chair. As it stands, James is your primary beneficiary, with your grandchildren receiving specific bequests for education. I want to change all of that, I said firmly. I've come to realize that inherited wealth without earned respect or demonstrated responsibility is more curse than blessing. Martin's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded and began taking notes as I outlined my new estate plan. By the time he left 3 hours later, we had restructured my entire legacy and developed a strategy that made me feel more empowered than I had in years. That Sunday, as promised, James and Patricia visited. They arrived 20 minutes late and stayed for exactly 45 minutes. They brought a small bag containing my reading glasses, 2 additional outfits, and my crossword puzzle book. They did not bring the photo albums I had specifically requested, nor my gardening journals, nor the small watercolor painting my third-grade students had created for me upon my retirement. The house is just so full of things, Patricia explained with a dismissive wave. It's going to take time to sort through everything. And speaking of the house, she glanced at James expectantly. We've had it appraised, he continued smoothly. The market is excellent right now. With a few cosmetic updates, we could list it by the end of the month. I sipped the tepid tea provided by the Golden Acres cafeteria and regarded my son steadily. That seems rather premature, considering I haven't decided to sell. James blinked, momentarily thrown off script. But Mom, we discussed this. You're here now. The house is sitting empty. It makes no financial sense to maintain it. Perhaps, I acknowledged, but it's still my house. My decision. Patricia's carefully composed expression tightened. Dorothy, be reasonable. The property taxes alone are paid through. The end of the year, I interrupted calmly. As is the insurance. I'm in no rush to make decisions while I'm still adapting to this new situation that you arranged without my input. The conversation deteriorated from there, with James becoming increasingly frustrated by my unwillingness to immediately proceed with selling my home of 30 years. Patricia's facade of concern slipped further with each exchange, revealing the impatience beneath. When they finally left, promising to return the following weekend with more of my belongings, I felt oddly liberated. For the first time in years, I had spoken my mind without filtering my words through the lens of maternal accommodation. I had set a boundary and held it despite their obvious displeasure. The next morning, I began physical therapy with a determined focus that surprised even my therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Greta. Most patients don't push themselves this hard after hip surgery, she commented as I completed an extra set of strengthening exercises. Most patients aren't working against a deadline, I replied. Deadline? She asked, helping me back to my wheelchair. I have plans, I said simply. Plans that require mobility and independence as quickly as possible. Over the next 2 weeks, I established a routine at Golden Acres that served my purposes. I attended physical therapy with unwavering dedication. I participated in enough group activities to appear properly integrated. I made strategic friendships with key staff members through genuine interest in their lives and judicious use of my still excellent baking skills, having discovered that the facility's kitchen could be used by residents during off hours. Most importantly, I had daily conversations with Martin Green, planning each step of what I had come to think of as my independence campaign. James and Patricia's Sunday visits continued, each more strained than the last. They brought dribs and drabs of my belongings, never the items I specifically requested, always with excuses about how difficult it was to locate things in such a cluttered house. Each visit included pointed questions about when I planned to make decisions about my property. During their 4th visit, James arrived with another folder of papers. These need your signature, he said, spreading documents across the small table in my room. Just standard forms updating your financial arrangements now that your living situation has changed. I put on my reading glasses and examined the papers carefully, aware of James shifting impatiently in his seat. "This is a power of attorney form," I noted, looking up at my son. "And this appears to be paperwork to list my house with Carlton Realty." "It's just to get the ball rolling," James explained smoothly. "You said yourself that managing these decisions is stressful. This allows me to handle things on your behalf." I removed my glasses and folded them carefully. "I won't be signing these today, James, or any day for that matter." The mask of filial concern slipped completely then. "Mom, be reasonable. You're not in a position to manage these affairs anymore. The doctor said—" "Which doctor?" I interrupted. "Certainly not Dr. Wilson, who's been my physician for 20 years, and who just last week said I'm recovering exceptionally well." Patricia, who had been silently monitoring our exchange, interjected. "Dorothy, we're only trying to help. James has expertise in financial matters. You should trust his judgment." "As I trusted his judgment about moving me here? On my birthday, no less?" The words hung in the air between us, the first direct acknowledgement of their actions. James had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable before rallying. "That was unfortunate timing, but it was the right decision. You need the care they provide here." "What I needed," I said quietly, "was to be treated with respect, to be consulted about my own life, to be valued for more than my assets." "That's not fair," James protested, but his eyes slid away from mine. "Isn't it? When was the last time you visited me at home when you weren't asking for money? When was the last time either of you asked about my friends, my activities, my interests? When was the last time you brought Andrew and Sophie to visit their grandmother without being prompted?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "I think you should go now," I said finally. "I have a bridge game scheduled with some friends." After they left, I wheeled myself to the common room where, indeed, a bridge game was forming. My new acquaintance, Helen Forrester, waved me over to a table where 2 other residents were already seated. "Just in time, Dorothy," Helen said cheerfully. "We need a 4th. Fair warning, though. Mabel plays to win." A thin woman with impeccably coiffed silver hair nodded firmly. "Life's too short for half-hearted efforts," she declared, dealing cards with surprisingly nimble fingers. As we played, I found myself genuinely enjoying the sharp minds and dry humor of my fellow residents. Helen had been a pediatrician before retirement. Mabel had owned a successful accounting firm. George, the 4th at our table, had been a literature professor at the state university. "Golden Acres isn't what any of us planned," Helen commented, during a break between hands. "But you make your life where you are, not where you thought you'd be." "How did you end up here?" I asked, curious about these people who were becoming something like friends. "My daughter lives overseas," Helen explained. "After my husband died, the house felt too empty. This was a compromise between independence and practicality." "My children wanted my house," Mabel stated bluntly. "I sold it out from under them and used the money to travel for 5 years. When I ran low on funds, I moved in here and told them if they wanted to see me, this is where I'd be." Her smile was thin but satisfied. 3 years later, they've finally started visiting regularly." George chuckled. "My story's less dramatic. Simple mathematics. Maintaining a house on a fixed income became unsustainable. Here, at least, there are no surprise expenses." As they shared their stories, I realized that each had found their own way to assert agency within constraints not entirely of their choosing. They had refused to be merely elderly parents to be managed, and instead had created lives with meaning and connection on their own terms. That night, I added several new elements to the plan Martin and I had been developing. If Golden Acres was to be my home for now, I would make it truly mine. Not a waiting room for death, not a storage facility for an inconvenient parent, but a base of operations for the next chapter of my life. The following day, I called a different realtor. Not about my house, but about the commercial property downtown. The 3 businesses leasing space there had all expressed interest in purchasing their units over the years. Now I was ready to discuss terms with specific conditions that fit my newly evolving plans. When Martin visited later that week, he brought the final drafts of my revised will and trust documents. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" he asked as I signed the last page. "It's quite a departure from your previous arrangements." "I've never been more certain of anything," I assured him. "And the other matter we discussed? Is that proceeding?" Martin nodded, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Everything is in place. The letters will be sent on Friday, as you requested." That Friday, exactly 1 month after my arrival at Golden Acres, embossed invitations were delivered to James and Patricia, to my grandchildren Andrew and Sophie, now 17 and 15, to Patricia's parents George and Nancy Harrington, and to several other carefully selected individuals. The invitations read, "Dorothy Taylor requests the honor of your presence for the formal reading of her last will and testament on Saturday, June 15th at 2 p.m. in the Golden Acres Retirement Community Main Hall. Attendance is strongly encouraged. For all beneficiaries." The response was immediate. James called within an hour of receiving his invitation, his voice taut with barely controlled alarm. "Mom, what is this? Why are you having a will reading? You're fine. The doctor said your recovery is going well." "Quite well," I agreed calmly. "This isn't about my health, James. It's about clarity, about ensuring everyone understands my wishes while I'm still very much alive to explain them." "But a formal reading? With Patricia's parents?" "Mom, this isn't necessary. If you have concerns, we can discuss them privately." "I prefer this format," I said firmly. "I'll expect you all on the 15th. When I hung up, I turned to find Greta, my physical therapist, smiling approvingly from the doorway of my room. "That sounded satisfying," she commented, pushing a walker toward me. "Now, let's see if we can get you transitioning from this wheelchair to the walker today. You said you wanted to be on your feet by the 15th. We have work to do." The days leading up to the will reading took on an almost dreamlike quality. Golden Acres, a place I had initially viewed as a gilded cage, became the stage for what I now thought of as my third act. The structured routine provided an unexpected framework for my personal renaissance. Morning physical therapy with Greta, afternoon bridge with Helen and Mabel, evenings spent in careful planning with Martin, or reviewing the documents from the sale of my commercial property. With each passing day, my strength returned. Not just physical strength as my hip healed, but a deeper, more essential strength of purpose and self-determination that I realized had been slowly eroding over years of accommodation and compromise. James called daily, each conversation more transparent in its panic than the last. "Mom, we should discuss this privately before the meeting. Family matters should stay within the family." "This is exactly how I want to handle it," I replied each time, my voice calm but unyielding. Patricia tried a different approach, showing up unannounced on Wednesday with a lavish gift basket filled with imported teas, gourmet cookies, and scented candles. "Just a little something to brighten your room," she said, setting it on my bedside table with a too bright smile. "I saw the tea and thought of you immediately." In the 7 years she had been married to James, Patricia had never once noticed my preference for tea over coffee. The basket was so obviously a peace offering, or more accurately a bribe, that I almost laughed. "How thoughtful," I said instead, watching her eyes dart around my room, cataloging what had been brought from my house and what remained there. "Was there something specific you wanted to discuss, Patricia?" She perched on the edge of the visitor's chair, smoothing her designer slacks. "I just thought we could chat, have some quality time. It's been so hectic lately with the children's activities and Jim's work." "And planning what to do with my house and possessions?" I added mildly. Her smile faltered. "Dorothy, that's not fair. We've only been trying to help simplify your life. By making decisions for me rather than with me? A flash of annoyance crossed her face before she composed herself. Perhaps we could have communicated better, but our intentions were good. Intentions matter less than actions, I said, quoting a principle I had impressed upon generations of high school students. And speaking of actions, I'm curious why you brought my gardening magazines, but not the photo albums I specifically requested. They're difficult to locate, she hedged. The house is so full of... The albums are in the built-in bookcase in the living room, exactly where they've been for 20 years, I interrupted. Directly beneath Harold's collection of first editions, which I notice have also not made their way here. A flush crept up her neck. We've been busy, Dorothy, and frankly, there's limited space here. Decisions have to be made about what's practical to keep. Indeed, I agreed. Decisions do need to be made, and they will be on Saturday. She left shortly after. Her mission of reconnaissance and reconciliation obviously failed. By Friday, I had graduated from the wheelchair to a walker, a development that Greta celebrated with heartfelt enthusiasm. You're determined, I'll give. You that? She said as we completed our afternoon session. Most people take twice as long to progress this far after a broken hip at your age. I've always been an overachiever, I replied, carefully lowering myself into a chair. And I have. Excellent motivation. The will reading tomorrow? She guessed, handing me a cup of water. I nodded. I want to be standing when they arrive. Small details matter in establishing tone. Greta laughed softly. You're a force of nature, Dorothy Taylor. Whatever you have planned, I have a feeling. Your family won't know what hit them. That evening, I enlisted Helen's help to wash and style my hair. Gone was the limp, hastily combed look I'd adopted since arriving at Golden Acres. In its place was a tidy, elegant style that Helen, who had maintained a meticulous appearance well into her 80s, assured me took 10 years off. The blue blouse, she advised as we surveyed the limited wardrobe James and Patricia had deigned to bring from my home. It brings out your eyes and gives you authority. I'll need all the authority I can muster, I admitted, hanging the blouse, carefully to avoid wrinkles. Helen patted my shoulder. From what you've told me about your son and his wife, they've underestimated you for years. There's power in that. Use it. I slept surprisingly well that night, waking before dawn with a clarity and purpose that had been missing from my life for too long. As the first light filtered through my window, I opened my planner and reviewed my notes for the day one final time. Everything was in place. By noon, the Golden Acres staff had transformed the main hall according to my specifications. Gone was the institutional feel of weekly movie nights and bland social gatherings. In its place was a formal arrangement with a polished oak table at the center, surrounded by comfortable chairs. Martin's assistant had delivered a leather portfolio containing all relevant documents, which now sat imposingly at the head of the table. Mr. Green called to confirm he'll arrive 30 minutes early to review everything with you. Diane, the activities director, informed me as staff added the finishing touches. And the refreshments will be delivered at 1:30. Thank you, Diane. You've been extraordinarily helpful. She smiled warmly. We don't get much excitement around here. Mrs. Taylor, whatever you have planned has become the talk of Golden Acres. At 1, I dressed carefully in the blue blouse Helen had recommended, paired with the single strand of pearls Harold had given me on our 25th anniversary. I applied makeup for the first time since arriving at the facility. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to bring color to my face and definition to my features. The woman who gazed back from the mirror looked poised, purposeful, and unmistakably in command of herself. Using the walker, I made my way to the small private dining room adjacent to the main hall, where Martin Green waited with a cup of tea and the reassuring competence that had made him Harold's trusted advisor decades ago. Everything is in order, he confirmed, passing me a final document to sign. "Are you certain you want to proceed this way? There would be less drama if we handled this conventionally." "I'm not interested in minimizing drama," I replied, signing with a firm hand. "I'm interested in clarity and accountability. My family chose theatrics when they deposited me here on my birthday without consultation. I'm merely providing an appropriate final act." Martin's eyes twinkled behind his rimless glasses. "Harold always said you were the backbone of the family." I see he wasn't exaggerating. At precisely 1:45, Golden Acres' front desk called to inform me that my guests had begun to arrive. James and Patricia were first, followed closely by Patricia's parents, George and Nancy Harrington. My grandchildren, Andrew and Sophie, arrived. With them, looking uncomfortable in clothing clearly selected for the occasion, Andrew in a blazer he had visibly outgrown, and Sophie in a demure dress that seemed at odds with the purple-streaked hair she had adopted in recent months. The final guests arrived in quick succession. Charles Wilson, the principal of Pinewood High School where I had taught for 42 years. Elaine Mercer, my closest friend since college. Frank Thompson, my neighbor who had called the ambulance. When I fell, and to James's visible surprise, Dr. Lillian Wilson, my longtime physician. At precisely 2:00, I entered the main hall, navigating carefully with my walker. The conversations that had been buzzing around the room died immediately. All eyes turned to me. I noted with satisfaction the range of expressions, James's barely concealed anxiety, Patricia's calculated neutrality, her parents' obvious discomfort at being included in what they clearly considered a private family matter. Most interesting were my grandchildren's reactions. Andrew with the wary assessment of an almost adult sensing undercurrents he didn't fully understand, and Sophie with a flash of what looked surprisingly like admiration. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my teacher's voice projecting clearly without seeming to raise its volume. "Please, be seated." There was a momentary shuffling as everyone found their places around the large oak table. Martin pulled out a chair for me at the head, discreetly removing the walker once I was seated. "For those who haven't met him, this is Martin Green, my attorney," I began. "He has been handling my legal affairs since my husband Harold passed away 11 years ago." Martin nodded professionally to the assembled group. "Before we begin, I want to clarify that while this proceeding is unusual, it is entirely legal. Mrs. Taylor has requested this reading of her will while she is of sound mind and body specifically to ensure her wishes are clearly understood by all potential beneficiaries." "Mom," James interjected, leaning forward with an expression of exaggerated concern. "Is this really necessary? If you have concerns about your arrangements, we could have discussed them privately." "I believe I've had quite enough of private family discussions where decisions about my life are made without my full participation," I replied evenly. "Today, everything will be transparent and on the record. Please continue, Martin." My attorney opened the leather portfolio and removed a document bound in a blue cover. "This is the last will and testament of Dorothy Eleanor Taylor, dated June Dow. 10th of this year, superseding all previous wills and codicils." I watched James stiffen. The previous will had been drawn up shortly after Harold's death, naming James as executor and primary beneficiary. This was the first confirmation that significant changes had been made. Martin began reading the formal introduction and legal declarations that frame all such documents. I used these moments to observe the faces around the table. Patricia was maintaining her composure, but her fingers drummed an anxious rhythm on the polished wood. Her parents looked increasingly uncomfortable, clearly wondering why they had been included in what should have been a private family matter. Charles Wilson and Dr. Wilson, no relation to each other despite the shared surname, maintained professional expressions, though I caught a slight smile from Elaine, who knew me well enough to suspect I had something significant planned. "Mrs. Taylor has left specific instructions to address the circumstances that prompted these revisions to her will," Martin continued. "She has asked to deliver these remarks personally." He passed me a single sheet of paper, though I hardly needed it. The words I was about to speak had been composed and refined over countless evenings as I sat in my room at Golden Acres, coming to terms with painful truths about my family. 1 month ago today, I began, I was brought to Golden Acres retirement community directly from the hospital where I was recovering from hip surgery. This transfer occurred on my 68th birthday, without prior meaningful consultation, without any opportunity to return to my home of 30 years to properly pack or prepare, and without any real consideration of my wishes. James shifted, uncomfortably. Mom, we've explained. I held up a hand, silencing him with a gesture familiar from my classroom days. I'm not finished, James. You'll have an opportunity to respond when I'm done. I continued, my voice steady. This decision was presented to me as necessary for my health and safety. However, in the weeks since, I have come to understand that other motivations were also at work, specifically, concerns about accessing and controlling my assets, which include my home on Maple Avenue and the commercial property on Main Street that has been in our family for 40 years. Patricia's face flushed with angry color, but a warning glance from James kept her silent. This experience has prompted me to reconsider not just my living arrangements, but the nature of my relationships and the legacy I wish to leave. The changes to my will reflect these reconsiderations. I nodded to Martin to proceed. He turned the page and continued reading. First, regarding the Dorothy and Harold Taylor family home at 412 Maple Avenue. This property shall be placed in a restricted trust for the purpose of establishing the Taylor Community Arts Center, providing space for art education, literary, events, and cultural programming for the residents of Pinewood. Charles Wilson, principal of Pinewood High School, will serve as head of the governing board, which will include other community leaders to be named separately. The shock on James and Patricia's faces would have been comical under other circumstances. For years, they had been counting on the substantial value of the Victorian home as part of their expected inheritance. Now, with a few sentences, it had been permanently removed from their grasp. The commercial property at 8791 Main Street, Martin continued, has been sold to the current tenants under terms negotiated separately. The proceeds from this sale have been allocated as follows. First, to purchase outright the residence of Mrs. Taylor within Golden Acres retirement community, ensuring her accommodation and care for the remainder of her life without financial concern. I watched a flash of relief cross James's face. At least his mother would not become a financial burden, followed immediately by the realization that another major asset had been removed from his anticipated inheritance. Second, Martin continued, to establish the Taylor Educational Trust, which will provide college scholarships to deserving students from Pinewood High School, with preference given to those pursuing careers in education or accounting, honoring the professional legacies of Dorothy and Harold Taylor. Sophie, my granddaughter, looked up sharply at this, her expression suddenly alert. Of all my family members, she was the only one who had shown genuine interest in my teaching career, occasionally asking about my former students or the books I had taught. Regarding personal assets, including savings, investments, and retirement accounts, Martin read, these shall be distributed as follows. 10% to Elaine Mercer, in recognition of 5 decades of steadfast friendship. Elaine's hand flew to her mouth in surprise. We had never discussed any bequest to her. 10% to Frank Thompson, whose prompt action when Mrs. Taylor fell likely saved her life, demonstrating the true meaning of being a good neighbor. Frank nodded solemnly, clearly moved by the acknowledgement. 20% to establish a health and wellness fund at Golden Acres Retirement Community, specifically to enhance physical therapy equipment and services, ensuring that future residents benefit from the excellent care Mrs. Taylor has received during her recovery. Greta, who had slipped into the back of the room, beamed at this announcement. 5% each to Andrew and Sophie Taylor, Martin continued. to be held in trust until they reach the age of 25, with the stipulation that the funds be used for education, entrepreneurship, or humanitarian endeavors. These bequests are made directly to my grandchildren in recognition of their inherent worth, separate from their parents' actions or expectations. Both teenagers straightened in their chairs, Andrew's expression confused but interested, Sophie's openly surprised and thoughtful. The remaining 50%, Martin paused for effect, will be placed in a charitable remainder trust, which will provide income to Mrs. Taylor during her lifetime and subsequently be divided between the Pinewood Public Library and the Herald. Taylor Memorial Scholarship at Westridge University. Martin closed the document and looked up. This concludes the primary bequests in Mrs. Taylor's will. There are additional specific items and provisions detailed in the appendices, which will be available for review after this meeting. The silence that followed was deafening. James sat frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. Patricia stared at me with undisguised hostility. Her parents, the Harringtons, looked deeply uncomfortable, clearly wishing they had not been included in this family drama. Sophie was the first to break the silence. "Grandma," she said, her voice uncharacteristically tentative, "does this mean you're using your money to help other kids go to college?" I smiled at her, appreciating her focus on the giving aspect rather than what her parents were not receiving. "Yes, Sophie. Education transformed my life, and I want to offer that opportunity to others." Andrew leaned forward. "And our trusts, they're just for us? Dad doesn't control them?" "Correct," Martin answered. "When you reach 25, you'll have full discretion over those funds, provided they're used within the broad parameters Mrs. Taylor has established." James finally found his voice. "Mother, this is outrageous. You've essentially disinherited your only son and his family, after everything we've done for you." "What exactly have you done for me, James?" I asked quietly. "Moved me to a retirement home without my consent? On my birthday? Attempted to sell my house out from under me? Treated my possessions as if they were already yours to dispose of?" "We were thinking of your safety," Patricia interjected. "The house was too much for you to manage. The stairs, alone." Strange how concerns about my navigating stairs emerged only after James and I discussed the significant equity in the property, I observed. And stranger still how quickly those concerns led to actions that would give you both effective control over my assets. Dr. Wilson cleared her throat. "If I may," she said, her professional demeanor commanding attention, "as Mrs. Taylor's physician for nearly 20 years, I can confirm that prior to her fall, she was in excellent health for her age, fully capable of living independently. The injury was an unfortunate accident that could have happened to anyone, not an indication of declining capacity." "Thank you, Lillian," I said, genuinely appreciative of her support. James turned to Martin, his expression hardening into something calculating. "This will can be contested. Mother clearly made these changes under duress, while recovering from a serious injury, possibly while medicated." "I anticipated that response," Martin interrupted smoothly, "which is why Dr. Wilson is here today, to attest to Mrs. Taylor's mental competence. Additionally, Mrs. Taylor underwent an independent psychological evaluation last week, which confirmed she is of sound mind and fully capable of making informed decisions about her estate. That report has been filed with the court along with the will. Any contest would be both expensive and, I assure you, futile." James's face flushed dark red. "You've been planning this all along, using our concern for your welfare against us, making us look like villains when we were only trying to help you." "Is that truly what you believe, James?" I asked, genuinely curious if he had so thoroughly convinced himself of his own righteousness. That depositing me in a retirement facility with only the clothes on my back and 3 outfits, on my birthday no less, was an act of concern rather than convenience. "You needed care," he insisted, voice rising. The doctor said, I said she would need temporary assistance during her recovery, Dr. Wilson corrected firmly. 6 to 8 weeks of home health visits, which her insurance would have covered. At no point did I recommend permanent relocation to a care facility. The Harringtons, who had been silent throughout this exchange, finally stirred. George Harrington cleared his throat awkwardly. Perhaps we should give the family some privacy to discuss these matters. Nancy and I don't really need to be part of... Actually, Mr. Harrington, I interjected, your presence is quite relevant. Martin, would you distribute the final documents? My attorney removed a set of folders from his portfolio and passed them around the table. These are itemized statements of financial transactions between Mrs. Taylor and James and Patricia Taylor over the past 7 years. James's face went slack with shock as he opened his folder. Patricia's hand trembled visibly as she did the same. As you can see, I continued, during this period, I provided James and Patricia with loans and gifts totaling $347,000, none of which has been repaid despite multiple promises to do so. These funds were withdrawn from my retirement savings and used for everything from property taxes on their Lakeshore Estates home to private school tuition for the children to renovations of their master bathroom. The Harringtons exchanged alarmed glances. Their daughter and son-in-law had apparently neglected to mention the extent of their financial dependence on me, while simultaneously presenting themselves as financially successful within Patricia's family's social circle. This accounting is not included to demand repayment, I clarified. At this point, I consider those funds gifts freely given out of love for my son and his family. However, I wanted complete transparency about the financial relationship that has existed between us, particularly in light of recent events and decisions. I turned to face the Harringtons directly. George, Nancy, I included you today because I wanted you to understand that your daughter and my son have been maintaining their lifestyle partially through my financial support, even as they presented themselves as independently successful. I believe you deserve to know this truth, particularly since they may now seek similar support from you. Nancy Harrington's lips formed a thin, disapproving line as she looked at her daughter, who seemed to physically shrink under her mother's. This is humiliating, Patricia hissed at James. Your mother has deliberately embarrassed us in front of my parents. Your embarrassment, I interrupted calmly, is entirely self-inflicted. Had you treated me with basic respect and honesty, none of this would have been necessary. I turned to my grandchildren, whose expressions reflected their struggle to process these revelations about their parents. Andrew, Sophie, I want you both to understand that none of this reflects on you. I love you both dearly, and my decisions today are not meant to punish you for your parents' actions. That's why I've established your trusts independently. Sophie nodded slowly, her eyes darting between her parents and me with new understanding. Andrew looked down at his hands, clearly uncomfortable with the entire situation. I believe we've covered everything essential, I said, nodding to Martin. Unless there are questions? James stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This isn't over, Mother. You've made a spectacle of family matters, embarrassed us in front of Patricia's parents and these strangers, and rewritten your will out of spite. If you think this changes nothing between us, it changes everything, I agreed calmly. And that is precisely the point. Our relationship has been fundamentally imbalanced for years. You have treated me as a commodity rather than a person, valued for what I could provide materially rather than who I am. Today marks the end of that dynamic. Come on, Patricia, James snapped, gathering his documents. We're leaving. Kids, let's go. Patricia rose immediately, her face a mask of humiliation and anger. Andrew stood obediently, but Sophie hesitated, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Actually, she said, her voice small but determined, I'd like to stay and talk to Grandma for a bit, if that's okay. James looked as if he might object, but Dr. Wilson smoothly interjected, I need a moment with Mrs. Taylor as well to discuss her physical therapy progress. Perhaps Sophie could join us, and I'll ensure she gets home safely afterward. After a moment of visible internal struggle, James nodded curtly. Fine. We'll see you at home, Sophie. Don't be late for dinner. As James, Patricia, and Andrew left, followed by the Harringtons who departed with cold formality, the atmosphere in the room perceptibly lightened. Charles Wilson approached to shake my hand. Dorothy, your home will make a wonderful community arts center, he said warmly. I'm honored to be involved. The choice was obvious, I replied. You've always understood the importance of creative expression in education. Harold would have approved wholeheartedly. After Charles departed, Elaine embraced me, tears in her eyes. You outrageous woman! I never expected any bequest, let alone something so generous. Who better to include in my legacy than the friend? Who has been part of every chapter of my adult life? I asked, returning her hug. Besides, I expect you to use some of those funds for our long-discussed trip to the Bronte parsonage. Frank Thompson approached next, clearly moved. Mrs. Taylor, I don't know what to say. I only did what any neighbor should do. Which makes you exceptional in today's world, I replied. Consider it an investment in old-fashioned neighborliness. As the room cleared, only Sophie, Dr. Wilson, and Martin remained. The doctor checked her watch. I actually do need to review your progress, Dorothy, but it can wait until tomorrow if you'd like some time with your granddaughter. I nodded gratefully. Thank you, Lillian, and thank you for being here today. Your professional perspective was invaluable. After Dr. Wilson and Martin departed, promising to return the following day with additional paperwork, I turned to Sophie, who had been waiting quietly, her expression thoughtful. Would you like to take a walk in the garden? I suggested. I'm getting quite proficient with this walker. She nodded, moving to hold the door for me. As we made our way slowly through the facility to the enclosed garden that was Golden Acres' most attractive feature, Sophie remained uncharacteristically silent. Once we were seated on a bench beneath a flowering dogwood tree, she finally spoke. They really did just dump you here on your birthday, didn't they? The bluntness of her question, so typical of her age yet so rarely directed at family truths, made me smile despite the painful subject. Yes, they did, without warning or meaningful discussion. She twisted a strand of purple-streaked hair around her finger, a nervous habit I'd noticed developing in recent years. That's really messed up, Grandma. Indeed, I agreed. And yet, it has led to some unexpected positive developments. I've made new friends here. I've had time to reflect on what I truly value. And most importantly, I've reclaimed my agency, my right to determine the course of my own life and the destination of the legacy your grandfather and I built together. Sophie looked around at the carefully maintained garden, the walking paths, the other residents enjoying the afternoon sunshine. Is it awful here, be honest? I considered the question seriously. Not awful, no. The staff is kind, the facility is clean and well-maintained, and there are activities to keep both mind and body engaged. But it wasn't my choice, Sophie. That's what matters. The right. Decision imposed without consent becomes the wrong decision by virtue of how it's implemented. She nodded slowly. I get that. It's like when Mom and Dad decided I had to quit art club to focus on college prep classes. They didn't even ask what art meant to me or how I was balancing everything. They just decided. This was news to me. Sophie had shown considerable artistic talent from an early age, something I had encouraged with birthday gifts of quality supplies and visits to museums. I didn't know they'd done that. I'm sorry, Sophie. Creative expression is important. She shrugged, but I could see the lingering hurt. Dad said art doesn't lead to stable careers, that I should focus on business or law if I want to be successful. Your grandfather was an accountant, I told her, about as practical a profession as one could choose. Yet he read poetry for pleasure, played chess competitively, and believed that a full life required both practical skills and creative outlets. Success isn't measured solely by income or status. Sophie was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. The trust you set up for me and Andrew. What did you mean by humanitarian endeavors? I meant that money can be used for more than accumulation or status symbols, I explained. It can fund education, start businesses that provide meaningful services or products, support causes that improve lives. When you're 25, if you wanted to use those funds to open an art therapy studio or teach art in underserved communities, that would absolutely qualify. Her eyes widened slightly. Really? You wouldn't mind if I didn't use it for something more practical? Sophie, the purpose of that trust is to help you become the best version of yourself, not a version your parents or society deems acceptable. The only requirement is that you use it thoughtfully, with intention and integrity. She seemed to be weighing something in her mind. Finally, she asked, "Are you staying here? At Golden Acres, I mean. Now that you've sold the downtown property and set up all these other things?" "For now," I replied. "My hip needs time to heal completely, and I've made some genuine connections here. But this was never meant to be my final chapter. Once I'm fully recovered, I'll reassess. Perhaps an apartment in town, close to the new community arts center. I might even volunteer there, sharing my love of literature with a new generation." Sophie nodded, a small smile forming. "I'd visit you there. Maybe we could do something with art and literature together, if you wanted." The tentative offer touched me deeply. "I'd like that very much, Sophie." She checked her phone and sighed. "I should probably go. Dad will be in an even worse mood after all this, and if I'm late—" "I understand," I said, slowly rising from the bench. "Would you like me to call a car service for you?" "No, Ede. I can take the bus. I do it all the time, though Mom and Dad don't know. They think I'm getting rides from friends." She hesitated, then impulsively hugged me. "I'm glad you stood up for yourself, Grandma. It was kind of badass." I laughed, surprised and delighted by both the sentiment and the terminology. "Thank you, Sophie. That might be the best compliment I've received in years." As I watched her walk away, tall, independent, far more perceptive than her parents gave her credit for, I felt a surge of hope. The painful confrontation with James and Patricia had been necessary, but the door it opened with Sophie was an unexpected gift. Slowly, I made my way back to my room, noting with newfound attention the details of the place that was, for now, at least my home. The art on the walls that I had previously dismissed as generic now revealed careful curation, landscapes of local landmarks, historical photographs of Pinewood in its early days. The common areas I had avoided out of resentment now appeared as potential spaces for new connections, new conversations. When I reached my room, I found a small vase of fresh flowers on the bedside table with a note from Helen. However it went, "You were brave. Join us for bridge at 7 if you feel up to it. H, M, and G." I sat on the edge of my bed, suddenly exhausted yet exhilarated. For the first time since being brought to Golden Acres, I felt truly present rather than simply deposited. I had taken control not just of my assets, but of my narrative. I had spoken truths long suppressed and established boundaries long overdue. Whether James and Patricia would eventually come to understand the lessons of today's meeting remained to be seen. Their pride had been wounded, their expectations shattered, their financial assumptions upended. Reconciliation, if it came, would require genuine soul-searching on their part and continued firmness on mine. But Sophie's unexpected alliance offered a glimmer of potential for a different kind of family connection, one based on authentic interest and mutual respect rather than obligation or financial expectation. And the new relationships I was forming, At Golden Acres provided a community I hadn't anticipated when I was first wheeled through its doors. I opened my planner and turned to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote, "Next Steps." Below, I began listing ideas for the Community Arts Center, questions about the scholarship program, plans for further physical therapy goals. The page filled quickly with possibilities that had nothing to do with James's expectations or Patricia's judgment. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, I was writing the script of my own life rather than playing a supporting role in someone else's. The future stretched before me not as a narrowing path of diminishing options, but as an open field of choices still to be made, connections still to be formed, joy still to be discovered. Golden Acres had been intended as my ending. Instead, it had become the setting for my new beginning. The morning after the will reading dawned with a peculiar sense of lightness. I had expected to feel drained, perhaps even regretful, after the emotional confrontation with James and Patricia. Instead, I woke feeling refreshed, as if some invisible weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The truth, once spoken aloud, had cleared the air in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had just finished dressing when a soft knock came at my door. Helen stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression of barely contained curiosity. "I figured you might need this," she said, offering me one of the cups. "And I'll admit I'm dying to hear how everything went yesterday. The whole facility is buzzing with speculation." I laughed, gesturing for her to enter. I should have known that nothing stays private at Golden Acres for long. "Are you kidding? This is better than any soap opera Mabel watches in the common room." Helen settled into the visitor's chair with the easy familiarity of a friend, rather than a recent acquaintance. "So? Did you really change your will right in front of your son?" "I did," I confirmed, taking a grateful sip of the coffee. "Much. Better than the institutional brew served in the dining room." Martin read the whole thing, complete with explanations of where every asset is going. "And how did James take it?" "About as well as you'd expect," I replied dryly. There was anger, accusations of spite and manipulation, threats to contest. The will, the full spectrum of entitled outrage. Helen nodded knowingly. "I went through something similar with my daughter-in-law when I sold my house. Not as dramatic as your situation, but the same underlying issue. They'd been counting on that asset and felt cheated when I redirected it." "What happened with your relationship afterward?" I asked, genuinely curious about how others had navigated similar family conflicts. She shrugged. "It was strained for a while, about a year of minimal contact, holiday cards but no visits. Then my granddaughter had her first baby, their first grandchild, and suddenly family connections became important again." She smiled wryly. "Nothing like a new generation to reset priorities." "I'm not sure I have a year to wait," I mused. "At my age, time becomes more precious." "Don't sell yourself short, Dorothy. You're barely pushing 70 with plenty of good years ahead." Helen finished her coffee and stood. "Bridge tonight? Mabel's threatening to find a 4th if you don't show up." "I wouldn't dare disappoint Mabel," I assured her. "Tell her I'll be there." After Helen left, I checked my phone and found 3 missed calls from Martin, a text from Sophie asking if she could visit again soon, and perhaps most surprisingly, an email from Charles Wilson with initial thoughts about the Community Arts Center. No messages from James or Patricia, which was exactly what I had expected. I returned Martin's call first. "Dorothy," he answered immediately. "How are you feeling today?" "Remarkably well," I told him truthfully. "What's happening on the legal front?" Predictably, I received a call from Gerald Hoffman this morning. He's an estate attorney from Springdale, apparently retained by James to explore contesting the will. I sighed. That didn't take long. "It's merely exploratory at this point," Martin assured me. "I explained our documentation of your competency and the independent evaluations. I also mentioned quite casually that any contest would become a matter of public record, including the circumstances of your placement at Golden Acres. I smiled, appreciating Martin's strategic thinking. And how did Attorney Hoffman respond to that? He indicated he would discuss options with his client, Martin replied, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. My sense is that James may not have fully disclosed the birthday aspect of your relocation to Golden Acres. Mr. Hoffman seemed genuinely surprised by that detail. James has always been selective about which facts he shares when seeking support for his actions, I noted. Patricia, too. Well, I think the threat of public scrutiny may dampen their enthusiasm for litigation. Martin paused. There's one other matter. Dr. Wilson called this morning. She has concerns about Golden Acres Physical Therapy Department being adequate for your continuing recovery. She suggested a more intensive program at Pinewood Rehabilitation Center, 3 days a week, with transportation provided. I considered this. Greta had been wonderful, but the facility's equipment was limited, and the sessions necessarily brief due to staffing constraints. That sounds reasonable. Did Lillian happen to mention how this would affect my residency status here? She did, Martin confirmed. Since it's outpatient treatment, you'd remain a resident at Golden Acres. However, it would give you regular excursions back to Pinewood, which I suspect might be welcome. Very welcome indeed, I agreed, thinking of the town I'd called home for over 40 years. Please tell Lillian I appreciate her suggestion and would like to proceed. After finishing with Martin, I texted Sophie back, suggesting she visit on Saturday afternoon if that worked with her schedule. Her response came almost immediately. Perfect. Can I bring my sketchbook? I want to show you my new project. The unexpected enthusiasm from my granddaughter warmed me. In our family's complicated dynamics, the children had always seemed peripheral, present at gatherings but rarely centered in conversations or decisions. Now it appeared Sophie was seeking a direct connection, independent of her parents' involvement or approval. I was responding to her text when another knock came at my door. This time it was Diane, the activities director, with an unexpected update. Mrs. Taylor, I wanted to let you know that your daughter-in-law was here earlier, dropping off some items from your home. She gestured to a staff member wheeling a cart piled with boxes. She said these were things you had specifically requested. I thanked Diane and, once alone, began examining the boxes with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. To my surprise, they contained exactly what I had asked for: photo albums, my gardening journals, Harold's first editions carefully wrapped in acid-free paper, and the small watercolor my students had given me upon retirement. No note accompanied. These items, no explanation for the sudden compliance with requests that had been ignored for weeks. I wondered what had motivated Patricia's change of heart. Genuine remorse, perhaps, or more likely, fear of further public embarrassment if she continued to withhold my personal possessions. I spent the afternoon arranging these treasures around my room, transforming the sterile space into something that felt more genuinely mine. The photo albums went on the built-in bookshelf, Harold's first editions on the highest shelf away from potential water damage. The student watercolor prominently displayed on the wall opposite my bed, where I could see it first thing each morning. By the time I joined Helen, Mabel, and George for bridge that evening, my room had become a reflection of my identity rather than merely a place of temporary residence. The change, though subtle, felt significant. A reclaiming of personal space. That paralleled my reclaiming of personal agency. You seem different tonight, Mabel observed as she dealt the cards with her characteristic precision. More settled somehow. I feel different, I admitted. Yesterday cleared the air in ways I hadn't anticipated. George nodded thoughtfully. Confrontation is underrated as a tool for resolution, not the shouting, door-slamming kind, but the honest naming of truths that have been avoided. Exactly, I agreed, organizing my cards, though there was a bit of door-slamming involved as well. The next few days fell into a new rhythm. Mornings were devoted to physical therapy with Greta, now supplemented with specific exercises she'd researched to prepare me for the more intensive program at Pinewood Rehabilitation. Afternoons were filled with calls and emails, to Charles about the Community Arts Center, to Martin about finalizing the trusts and charitable foundations, to the realtor handling the final details of the commercial property sale. On Thursday, I received my first communication from James since the will reading. A terse email that read simply, "We need to discuss the house. Items need to be removed before any conversion work begins. Let me know when you're available." No acknowledgement of the confrontation, no reference to his threats to contest the will, no mention of how Sophie's visit had gone. Just practical matters related to property he no longer controlled. It was so typically James that I almost laughed when emotional terrain became too complicated to navigate. He retreated to logistics and practicalities. I replied with equal brevity, "Martin is coordinating with Charles Wilson regarding the transition of the house. They'll be in touch about scheduling removal of personal items. Any specific requests should go through Martin." By keeping all communication channeled through attorneys and third parties, I was establishing a new pattern in our relationship, one based on formal boundaries rather than the emotional manipulation that had characterized recent years. James might never acknowledge the harm his actions had caused, but he would be required to interact with me on terms that recognized my autonomy. Saturday arrived with unexpected nervousness on my part. Sophie's visit represented the first potential bridge across the chasm that had opened between me and my family. I found myself changing clothes twice, fussing with my hair, arranging and rearranging the seating in my room to create a comfortable space for conversation. She arrived precisely at the agreed-upon time, a large portfolio case slung over her shoulder, her purple-streaked hair now complemented by a small nose stud I hadn't noticed at the will reading. The combination of artistic self-expression and typical teenage rebellion made me smile. There was something refreshingly authentic about Sophie's choices, compared to the carefully curated appearances her parents maintained. "This place is actually nicer than I expected," she commented, looking around my room with genuine interest. "I like what you've done with it. It feels like you now." "That's exactly what I was aiming for," I replied, touched by her perception. "Limited space means being intentional about what you keep around you." She nodded, trailing her fingers along the spines of Harold's first editions. "Grandpa collected these, right? Dad mentioned it once, said they were valuable." "Indeed they are, but their value goes beyond monetary. Your grandfather loved the tactile experience of physical books, the weight, the smell, the sound of pages turning." I smiled at the memory. He used to say that a well-made book is one of the few things humans create that improves with age. Sophie carefully removed one from the shelf, a first edition of Steinbeck's East of Eden that Harold had particularly treasured. "May I?" "Of course." I watched as she handled it with appropriate care, opening it gently to avoid stressing. The spine. "Your grandfather would have loved to share his collection with you." "Dad never really talked about Grandpa much," she said, carefully returning the book to its place. "Just that he was an accountant and good with money." "He was certainly those things, but so much more as well," I told her. "He played chess at the state championship level. He knew the Latin name of every plant in our garden. He volunteered teaching financial literacy at the community center every Tuesday evening. For 20 years. Sophie settled into the chair across from me, pulling her sketchbook from her portfolio. "I wish I'd known him better. I was only 5 when he died." "You have his eyes," I told her. "And more importantly, his curiosity." Harold was never content with surface-level understanding of anything that interested him. She smiled at that, clearly pleased by the comparison. "Is that why you included the humanitarian thing in my trust? Because you think I'm like him?" "Partly," I acknowledged. "But also because I've watched you over the years, Sophie. You observe more than you say. You question things privately even when you don't speak up. Those qualities, combined with creative talent, could lead to meaningful contributions if you're given the right opportunities. She ducked her head, unused to such direct assessment of her character. After a moment, she opened her sketchbook and turned it toward me. This is what I've been working on. It's for AP Art. The page revealed a series of interconnected drawings, a visual narrative exploring aging and isolation. The technical skill was impressive, but more striking was the emotional intelligence evident in the composition. The final panel showed elderly figures surrounded by younger ones, engaged in what appeared to be knowledge transfer, teaching, sharing stories, demonstrating skills. "Sophie, this is remarkable," I said, genuinely moved. The storytelling element is particularly strong. "It's about intergenerational connection," she explained, her voice gaining confidence as she discussed her work. "How older people get pushed aside in our culture, but they have all this knowledge and experience that just gets wasted. My art teacher says it shows thematic maturity, whatever that means." "It means you're thinking beyond technique to meaning," I translated. "That's rare at any age, but particularly at 17. She turned to another page, this one showing preliminary sketches for a new series. "After what happened with you and my parents, I started thinking about how we treat elderly family members in general. Like, society says we should respect our elders, but then we shove them into retirement homes and forget about them. It's hypocritical." The directness of her observation was startling but refreshingly honest. "That's a sophisticated critique, Sophie, and not entirely wrong, though the reality has nuances." "Like what?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Well, there are legitimate reasons why some elderly people need specialized care environments. And some retirement communities genuinely enrich residents' lives through social connections and activities that might not be available to someone living alone." I gestured around us. "Golden Acres isn't terrible in that regard. But you're right about the broader pattern of marginalizing older people once they're no longer considered economically productive." Sophie considered this, then asked bluntly, "Are you mad at Dad? Like, really mad? Not just disappointed or whatever?" The question deserved an honest answer. "I'm hurt more than angry," I said after a moment's reflection. "Hurt that he valued access to my assets more than he valued my autonomy and dignity. Hurt that 30 years of putting his needs first didn't earn me basic respect when I became inconvenient." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. But I'm also clear-eyed about my own role in creating those dynamics. I enabled behaviors that I should have questioned years ago. Like what? Like continually providing financial support without accountability. Like accepting being excluded from family decisions that affected me directly. Like allowing my identity to be reduced to James's mother or Andrew and Sophie's grandmother, rather than insisting on being recognized as a complete person with my own priorities and preferences. Sophie absorbed this thoughtfully. "Dad's pretty upset about the will thing. He and Mom had a huge fight after we got home. I could hear them through the walls." "I'm sorry you had to witness that," I said sincerely. "What about you? How do you feel about my decisions regarding the will?" She considered the question with a seriousness that belied her age. "At first I was confused. I mean, the trust for me and Andrew is generous and everything, but it seemed harsh to cut Dad out completely." She twisted a strand of hair around her finger. "But then I started thinking about how they just dumped you here without really asking, and how they never talk about you except when they need something, and it started to make more sense." "That's a fair assessment," I acknowledged. "I didn't make those decisions lightly or out of simple revenge. I wanted my legacy to reflect my values: education, community enrichment, creative expression, rather than simply defaulting to family inheritance regardless of how that family had behaved." "The art center is really cool," Sophie offered. I could maybe volunteer there sometime? Help with classes or something? The tentative suggestion touched me deeply. I think that would be wonderful, Sophie. Charles Wilson is heading the planning committee, and I know he'd welcome input from a young artist with your talent. We spent the next hour looking through her sketchbook, discussing techniques and influences, potential college programs for art majors, and her ideas for future projects. The conversation flowed with an ease that had never characterized our previous interactions, which had always been overshadowed by James and Patricia's mediating presence. As our visit was drawing to a close, Sophie hesitated, then asked, "Would it be okay if I came back next week? Maybe regularly? I could show you my progress on the intergenerational series." "I'd like that very much," I told her warmly. "And, starting next week, I'll be going into Pinewood 3 days a week for physical therapy. Perhaps you could meet me there sometimes instead. Maybe have lunch downtown afterward." Her face lit up at the suggestion. "That would be awesome. There's this new cafe near the high school that has amazing smoothies." After she left, promising to text about specific plans, I sat reflecting on the unexpected gift of this evolving relationship with my granddaughter. Through the painful rupture with James and Patricia, a space had opened for a more direct, authentic connection with Sophie, one based on genuine interest and shared passions rather than obligatory family roles. The following week brought new developments on multiple fronts. My first session at Pinewood Rehabilitation Center proved challenging but invigorating. The facilities were state-of-the-art, the therapists knowledgeable and attentive. By the end of the 2-hour session, I was exhausted but encouraged by their assessment that I could potentially transition to a cane within a month if progress continued at this rate. Even more satisfying was the hour I spent afterward being driven around Pinewood by Frank Thompson, who had volunteered to show me the current status of my house and downtown property. The commercial building had new signage announcing the businesses as the proud new owners of their spaces, a visible symbol of the transition that had funded my next chapter. The house on Maple Avenue showed early signs of its coming transformation. A professional survey team was measuring the grounds, and Charles Wilson stood on the porch with an architect, gesturing animatedly as they discussed possibilities. "Charles seems excited about the project," Frank commented as we observed from the car. "It's giving him a legacy project as he approaches retirement," I explained. "Something meaningful to contribute to the town he's served for decades." "Rather, like what you've done," Frank observed astutely. "Redirecting your resources toward lasting community impact." The parallel hadn't occurred to me explicitly, but Frank was right. Charles and I were both at similar life stages, looking to ensure our professional lives culminated in something that would outlast us. That evening, back at Golden Acres, I attended a newly formed book club that Helen had organized with several other residents. The discussion of Elizabeth Strout's Olive Kitteridge was lively and insightful, touching on themes of aging, regret, connection, and redemption that resonated deeply with our collective experiences. "I find it comforting, in a strange way," Helen commented as the meeting wound down, "to read about characters facing the same challenges we are, the physical indignities of aging, adult children who don't understand us, the struggle to remain relevant in a world that increasingly overlooks us." Mabel nodded emphatically. "Representation matters at every age. Most literature treats people our age as peripheral characters, comic relief, or burdens to the actual protagonists. It's refreshing to see ourselves as the main characters for a change." "We are the main characters in our own lives," I pointed out, "regardless of how others may perceive us." "Exactly," George exclaimed, thumping his cane for emphasis. "That's what I keep telling my son when he tries to make decisions for me. I may be 84, but I'm still the protagonist of my own damn story." The room erupted in laughter and applause, a moment of shared understanding that transcended our diverse backgrounds and circumstances. In that moment, I felt a genuine sense of community, Not the manufactured camaraderie of scheduled activities, but the authentic connection of people recognizing themselves in each other's experiences. As the group dispersed, Helen lingered behind to help me gather the refreshments we'd provided. "You've changed since you arrived," she observed, not for the first time. "When they first wheeled you in, you had that shell-shocked look we all recognize, the 'how did I end up here' expression." "I certainly felt that way," I admitted, like my life had been hijacked. "And now?" I considered the question seriously. "Now, I feel like I've reclaimed the controls. Golden Acres isn't where I would have chosen to be at this point in my life, but I'm making it work for me rather than simply enduring it." "That's the secret," Helen said with a knowing smile. "Making choices within constraints rather than surrendering to circumstances. It's what separates those who merely exist here from those who continue to actually live here." The wisdom of her observation stayed with me as I prepared for bed that night. When James and Patricia had deposited me at Golden Acres, their expectation, conscious or not, had been that I would become a safely contained, manageable version of myself. A mother and grandmother who would accept her designated role in the family narrative they had constructed. The elderly parent properly situated in appropriate housing, visited on designated occasions, relegated to the periphery of family life, while her assets were redistributed according to the younger generation's priorities. Instead, I had refused that narrative entirely. I had asserted my right to determine not just where my assets would go, but how my remaining years would unfold. I had replaced their story about me with my own story about myself, one in which I remained the protagonist rather than a supporting character in their drama. The following morning brought a surprise. An email from James with a subject line that simply read, "Coffee?" The body of the message was characteristically brief. "Mom, I'd like to talk. Would you be willing to meet for coffee next Thursday after your PT session? Just the two of us. James." No mention of the will, no reference to his earlier threats. To contest it, no acknowledgement of the emotional confrontation at the reading. Yet the request itself represented a significant shift from his previous stance. This wasn't a demand conveyed through attorneys or a practical communication about property matters. It was a personal request for direct conversation. I stared at the message for several minutes, weighing my response. The hurt James had caused was still raw, the breach of trust profound. Part of me wanted to maintain the formal boundaries I had established, to protect myself from further manipulation or disappointment. Yet another part recognized that healing, if it was possible at all, would require direct engagement rather than continued distance. James was, after all, my only child. The connection between us, however damaged, represented decades of shared history and care. After careful consideration, I replied, "Thursday works. Therapy ends at 11:30. Pinewood Perks at noon? Mom." His response came almost immediately. "See you then." The simplicity of this exchange belied the complexity of emotions surrounding it. I had no illusions about an easy reconciliation or dramatic change of heart on James's part. Whatever had motivated his request, guilt, practical concerns about family appearances, genuine reflection, or Sophie's influence, the conversation would likely be challenging for us both. Yet as I closed my email and turned to the day ahead, I felt a cautious sense of possibility. Not the naive hope that everything would return to a harmonious state that had, in truth, never really existed. Rather, the mature recognition that authentic relationships require truth-telling, boundary setting, and sometimes painful reckonings before new, healthier patterns can emerge. Golden Acres had been intended as an ending, a convenient solution, to the problem of an aging parent whose needs conflicted with her children's desires. Instead, it had become a beginning, the launch point for a reclamation of agency, a redefinition of family relationships, and a recommitment to living with purpose and intention regardless of age or circumstance. As I made my way to the dining Room for breakfast. I passed the community bulletin board where a flyer announced an upcoming talk. Reimagining Retirement, Creating Meaning in Your Third Act. I stopped, struck by the synchronicity of the title with my recent thoughts. Are you going to attend? Asked a voice beside me. I turned to find George, leaning on his cane but standing straighter than when I had first met him. I think I will, I replied, though I feel like I'm already conducting that reimagining in real time. He chuckled. The best teachers are often those in the midst of the journey themselves. You should consider giving the next talk in the series. The suggestion took me by surprise. Me? I'm hardly an expert. Expertise comes in many forms, George countered. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from those who have recently navigated the terrain rather than those who study it from a distance. As I considered his words, I realized that my experience, while painful and not one I would have chosen, did offer lessons that might benefit others. The journey from displacement to empowerment, from passive acceptance to active choice-making, from being managed to managing one's own path. These were transitions many residents of Golden Acres were struggling to make. I'll think about it, I promised George as we entered the dining room together. See that you do, he replied with the gentle authority of his former professorial role. Your story deserves a wider audience than just your family and friends. I smiled at the thought. My story was still being written, its final chapters yet to be determined. But for the first time since that birthday when my life had been upended without my consent, I felt fully engaged in shaping those chapters rather than merely watching them unfold. The unexpected placement at Golden Acres, intended as an ending, had, instead, become a doorway to new possibilities, new connections, and a new understanding of what it meant to age with dignity, purpose, and self-determination. Not a conclusion, but a continuation. Not an epilogue, but a vital, dynamic chapter in a life still very much in progress. The morning of my scheduled coffee with James dawned with an unexpected flurry of nerves. I found myself changing outfits twice, fussing with my hair, and rehearsing potential responses to scenarios that might arise. It had been decades since I'd felt such anticipation about seeing my own son. A realization that was both sad and telling. You look nice, Helen commented as I made my way through the Golden Acres lobby, using my cane with the practiced skill I'd developed over the past weeks of therapy. Special occasion? Meeting James for coffee, I replied, adjusting the collar of my blue cardigan. Helen's eyebrows rose. Interesting. First contact since the will reading? Apart from a few terse emails about practical matters, yes. She nodded sagely. Armor up, emotionally speaking. First encounters after confrontations tend to be either very productive or very disappointing. Rarely anything in between. Voice of experience? I asked, curious about Helen's own family dynamics, which she rarely discussed. 3 decades. As a pediatrician, she replied with a wry smile. I've witnessed more family reckonings than most therapists. Children grow up, parents age, roles reverse, resentments surface, reconciliations occur, or don't. The human family cycle in all, its messy glory. The transportation service arranged by Dr. Wilson arrived promptly at 9:30, and I was soon on my way to Pinewood Rehabilitation Center. The 2-hour therapy session was particularly challenging. Transition exercises from cane to unassisted, walking, balance work on unstable surfaces, strength training for hip stabilization. By the time it concluded, I was physically exhausted but mentally alert, perhaps even sharpened by the physical exertion. I had the driver drop me at Pinewood Perks 15 minutes early, wanting to secure a quiet corner table and gather my thoughts, before James arrived. The cafe had opened after Harold's death and represented the new Pinewood that was gradually emerging, less provincial, more contemporary, yet still maintaining the small-town charm that had defined the community for generations. I ordered a pot of Earl Grey tea and settled at a table near the back, positioned so I could see the door but wasn't immediately visible to those entering. Old teacher habits die hard. I had always preferred to observe before being observed. James arrived precisely at noon, dressed in the business casual attire he favored for non-work days: pressed khakis, a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to mid-forearm, loafers that managed to appear simultaneously casual and expensive. He spotted me almost immediately, his expression a carefully neutral mask that revealed nothing of his emotional state. "Mom?" he said as he approached the table. "You look well." "Thank you," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Rehabilitation is going better than expected." He sat, placing his phone face down on the table in what I recognized as his version of giving someone his full attention. "That's good to hear. Dr. Wilson mentioned you might be able to transition to a cane soon." "Already have," I said, nodding toward where my cane rested against the wall. "For the past week. The goal now is short distances without any support." "That's impressive," he acknowledged, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. "The staff at Golden Acres is monitoring your progress?" "They are. Greta, my therapist there, coordinates with the team at Pinewood Rehab." A young barista approached, and James ordered a black coffee. Once she departed, a silence fell between us, not the comfortable quiet of people at ease with each other, but the weighted pause of those navigating uncertain terrain. I decided to address the elephant in the room directly. "I admit I was surprised by your invitation, James. Our last interaction didn't suggest you were interested in casual coffee meetings." He had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. "I've had some time to think since then, and some input from others." "Sophie?" I guessed, remembering my granddaughter's mention of heated arguments after the will reading. He nodded reluctantly. "Among others. She's been quite vocal about her perspective on the situation." "She's a perceptive young woman," I observed, "more attuned to interpersonal dynamics than many adults I know." James's coffee arrived, and he took a deliberate sip before responding. "She says you two have been spending time together, that she's been visiting you at Golden Acres and meeting you here in Pinewood." "We have," I confirmed. "We've discovered shared interests that hadn't had the opportunity to emerge in typical family gatherings." "Her art," James said, his tone neutral, but his expression suggesting ongoing conflict about this topic. "Yes, she's remarkably talented, with a mature perspective that informs her technical skills." He set his cup down with careful precision. "Patricia and I have concerns about her focus on art. College applications are approaching, and more practical majors would provide better career prospects." I bit back my initial response, which would have only widened the gulf between us. Instead, I said carefully, "Sophie is developing valuable skills through her art: critical thinking, visual communication, project planning, creative problem solving. These translate to many professional contexts, not just traditional art careers." "Perhaps," he conceded, though his tone suggested minimal conviction. "But the financial stability of established professions—" "James," I interrupted gently, "we didn't meet today to debate Sophie's educational choices. That's between you, Patricia, and Sophie herself. Though I would caution against dismissing her passion solely on financial grounds. Some of the most miserable, wealthy people I've known chose careers for money rather than meaning." He frowned slightly, but didn't argue the point. Instead, he shifted direction entirely. "The house transition is proceeding. Charles Wilson and his committee have been thorough in their inventory and planning. They've identified items that should remain with the Arts Center and those that are clearly personal belongings." "I'm glad to hear it," I said, noting his retreat to practical matters when emotional territory became uncomfortable, a pattern established long ago. "Has Patricia delivered all the requested items to Golden Acres?" "Most of them," he replied. "There are some larger pieces: your desk, the reading chair from the sunroom, several bookcases. that won't fit in your current accommodations. We've been storing them. I appreciate that, I said sincerely. When I transition to more permanent housing, I'll want those pieces. They're not valuable in monetary terms, but they matter to me. James looked up sharply. You're planning to leave Golden Acres? Eventually, I confirmed. Once my recovery is more complete, I'm considering options in Pinewood, perhaps a small apartment near the Arts Center. But the care at Golden Acres, he began, is adequate for my current needs, I finished. But not necessary long-term. Dr. Wilson believes I'll regain sufficient mobility and strength to live independently with minimal support. James sat back, absorbing this information. I could almost see him recalibrating his mental narrative, one in which I had been neatly situated at Golden Acres indefinitely, the complex problem of an aging parent tidily resolved. That wasn't the plan, he said finally, then immediately seemed to regret his phrasing. No, I agreed, keeping my voice even. It wasn't my plan to be taken to a retirement facility on my birthday without meaningful consultation. But plans change, James. We adapt. We make new choices within the constraints we're given. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. After a moment, he said, about that day, the timing was unfortunate. We should have been more considerate. It wasn't quite an apology, more an acknowledgement of a tactical error than a recognition of a moral failing. Still, it represented more self-reflection than I had expected from this initial conversation. Yes, I said simply. You should have been. He fidgeted with his coffee cup, turning it in small increments. The situation with the will. I've been advised that contesting it would be complicated and potentially embarrassing for everyone involved. I nodded, unsurprised. Martin mentioned your attorney had reached out. I'm glad you've received sound legal counsel. It's not just about legal considerations, James said, a hint of frustration entering his voice. The public nature of the process, the family matters that would become record. Patricia's parents are very concerned about appearances. I can imagine, I said dryly, recalling the Harringtons' obvious discomfort at the will reading. James leaned forward slightly. Mom, I understand you were upset about how things were handled, but the changes to your will, they seem designed to hurt us, to punish us. I took a measured sip of tea, considering my response carefully. This moment felt pivotal to whatever relationship might emerge from the ashes of the old one. My decisions weren't about punishment, James. They were about alignment, ensuring my resources supported my actual values rather than defaulting to conventional expectations. I met his gaze directly. When I reviewed my life and legacy, I realized I wanted to contribute to education, community enrichment, and creative expression. The structures I've established do exactly that. But family, he began, is important, I finished, which is why Andrew and Sophie have their trusts. But family relationships aren't transactional, James. Love and respect can't be purchased through inheritance promises or withheld to ensure compliance. He frowned. No one was trying to purchase anything. We genuinely believed Golden Acres was the best solution after your fall. Perhaps, I conceded. But the manner of execution, no consultation, no transition plan, no respect for my autonomy, revealed something significant about how you and Patricia view me. Not as an adult with agency and preferences, but as a problem to be managed according to your convenience. James flushed slightly. That's not fair. We were concerned about your safety. Were you equally concerned when you asked me for $30,000 to renovate your master bathroom while I was living on a fixed income? Or when you suggested I sell the house immediately after Harold died so you could use the proceeds for your tuition? The questions weren't delivered with heat, but with a calm directness that made them impossible to deflect. He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. Those were different circumstances. They were part of a pattern, I corrected gently. A pattern of prioritizing your financial convenience over my well-being and autonomy. The Golden Acres decision was simply the culmination of that pattern. James was silent for a long moment, his expression a complex mixture of defensiveness, discomfort, and what might have been the first glimmerings of genuine self-reflection. "I never saw it that way," he said finally. "I know," I replied. "That's part of the problem." The conversation paused as the barista returned to refill James's coffee. In that brief interlude, I observed my son with the clarity that only distance and perspective can provide. He was fundamentally decent, but entrenched in certain narratives about family obligation and parental sacrifice that had allowed him to justify increasingly problematic behaviors. When the barista departed, I decided to offer an olive branch, not a surrender, but an opening. "James, I'd like to have a relationship with you moving forward, but it needs to be one based on mutual respect rather than expectation or obligation. I'm not just your mother. I'm a person with my own priorities, preferences, and right to self-determination." He nodded slowly. "I understand. Or at least I'm trying to." "That's a start," I acknowledged. "Sophie has been a good bridge these past weeks. Her visits have meant a great deal to me." His expression softened slightly at the mention of his daughter. "She talks about you differently now. Before, you were just grandma, a role, a holiday obligation. Now she talks about Dorothy and her projects and ideas. I've enjoyed getting to know her as a young adult rather than just a grandchild," I said. "She has a remarkable mind." "She mentioned you might help her with college applications," he said, a question implicit in his tone. "Only if she wants my input," I clarified, "and with the understanding that the final decisions are hers to make, in consultation with you and Patricia as her parents." He seemed to accept this boundary, nodding thoughtfully. "She's nearly 18, more independent every day." "That's as it should be," I observed. "Our job as parents and grandparents is to prepare them to make their own choices, not to make their choices for them." Something in my phrasing seemed to resonate, and James looked at me with what appeared to be new understanding. "Is that how you felt? That we were making your choices for you rather than helping you make your own?" "Exactly," I confirmed, grateful for this moment of genuine comprehension. "And there's a world of difference between the two approaches." Our conversation continued for another 30 minutes, moving from these deeper waters to more practical matters. The timeline for the Arts Center development, my physical therapy progress, Sophie's upcoming college applications. By the time we prepared to leave, a tentative new equilibrium had been established. Not the easy rapport of the past, but not the hostile distance of recent weeks either. As James helped me with my coat, he asked hesitantly, "Would it be all right if I called you next week? Perhaps we could make this a regular thing while you're in Pinewood for therapy." "I'd like that," I said, meaning it despite the lingering hurt and necessary caution I still felt. "Perhaps Sophie could join us occasionally." "I'll mention it to her," he agreed, holding the door as we exited the cafe. We parted on the sidewalk, his return to his office and mine to the rehabilitation center where my transportation would collect me. No hug was exchanged, but our goodbye held none of the brittle tension that had characterized our interactions since the Golden Acres relocation. As I watched him walk away, I felt neither the vindication of victory nor the warmth of reconciliation, but something more nuanced, the sober satisfaction of having navigated difficult terrain with integrity and clarity. Whatever relationship emerged between us now would be built on truth rather than convenient fictions, on mutual respect rather than unexamined expectations. When I returned to Golden Acres that afternoon, I found Helen, Mabel, and George waiting for me in the common room, their expressions a barely contained mixture of curiosity and concern. "Well, Mabel demanded without preamble. How did it go with your son? Do we need to form a defensive perimeter around your room, or was there actual communication? I laughed, genuinely amused by their protective solidarity. There was communication. Tentative and imperfect, but real. Details, please, Helen requested, pouring me a cup of coffee from the carafe they had apparently prepared in anticipation of my return. We've been speculating all morning. As I recounted the conversation, their expressions ranged from skepticism to cautious approval. George harumphed at James's non-apology about the birthday relocation, while Helen nodded appreciatively at my boundary setting around Sophie's college choices. You navigated that remarkably well, Mabel observed when I finished. Clear but not cruel, firm but not rigid. I'd have been tempted to twist the knife a bit more, given what they did. Revenge is overrated, I replied. I'm more interested in creating a sustainable new dynamic than in scoring points. Wise, George approved, though I still think they got off easily, considering. Before I could respond, Diane approached with an official-looking envelope. Mrs. Taylor, this just arrived for you by courier. They said it required a signature. I thanked her and examined the envelope, recognizing Martin's firm's logo in the corner. Inside was a simple note from my attorney, along with several formal documents. Good news? Helen inquired, noting my expression as I reviewed the contents. Very good, I confirmed. The sale of the commercial property is complete. The Community Arts Center Foundation has been officially established with its initial funding. And my permanent residence here at Golden Acres has been secured through the trust arrangement. I looked up with a smile. Everything we planned at the will reading is now legally implemented. Mabel raised her coffee cup in a toast. To plans well executed and futures secured. And to second acts that outshine the first, Helen added, with a warm smile. I joined their toast, feeling a profound sense of completion. The financial and legal aspects of my new path were now firmly in place, providing the foundation for whatever came next. That evening, while organizing the newly secured documents in my room, I received a text from Sophie. Dad mentioned coffee next week with you. Can I come too? Also have some college essay drafts to show you if that's okay. I replied immediately, absolutely to both. Your perspective would be valuable during coffee with your father, and I'd be honored to review your essays. Her response came with typical teenage speed. Cool. Also, Mr. Wilson said I could maybe help design some stuff for the Arts Center. Is that for real? Very real, I confirmed. Your artistic input would be wonderful. I'll connect you directly with Charles. The exchange left me smiling, this unexpected bond with my granddaughter representing perhaps the most positive outcome of the painful rupture with James and Patricia. Sometimes it takes an earthquake to reveal what lies beneath seemingly solid ground. The following day brought another surprise visitor to Golden Acres. Dr. Lillian Wilson arrived during afternoon visiting hours with a folder of medical reports and a determined expression. I've been reviewing your case with the rehabilitation team, she announced after we exchanged greetings. Your progress has exceeded all expectations. At this rate, you'll be ready for independent living with minimal support within 2 months. That's wonderful news, I said, genuinely pleased by this medical validation of what I'd already begun to sense myself. Has someone informed James? He seemed surprised yesterday when I mentioned eventual plans to leave Golden Acres. Lillian smiled wryly. I thought it best to speak with you directly before updating family members. Professional courtesy aside, recent events suggested you might prefer to control your own medical information. Indeed, I agreed, appreciating her discernment. What exactly would independent living with minimal support entail? She opened her folder, revealing floor plans I didn't immediately recognize. These are the new senior apartments being completed on Pine Street in Pinewood. Single-level living, emergency call systems, weekly housekeeping services available, but completely private and self-contained. Several units are still available for the November occupancy date. I studied the plans with interest. The location was ideal. 2 blocks from the public library, easy walking distance to downtown shops, and less than a mile from what would soon become the Community Arts Center. They're designed for precisely your situation, Lillian continued. Active, independent seniors who want to remain integrated in the community but might benefit from some unobtrusive support systems. They look perfect, I admitted, but would I be medically ready by November? That's only 2 months away. Based on your current trajectory, absolutely, she confirmed. You're already managing with just a cane. By November, you should be fully ambulatory with perhaps a cane for longer distances or uneven terrain. Your overall strength and balance are returning remarkably well. As Lillian departed, leaving the floor plans for my consideration, I felt a surge of excitement that had nothing to do with medical prognoses or housing specifications. The possibility of returning to Pinewood, not to my former home, which was now rightfully evolving into something new, but to a space that would accommodate this new chapter of my life, filled me with anticipation rather than apprehension. That evening, I shared the floor plans with Helen during our now regular chess game in the common room. She examined them with the critical eye of someone who had made a similar transition several years earlier. Good layout, she approved. Practical without feeling institutional, and the location is excellent. You mentioned you prefer being able to walk to essential services. I do, I confirmed, moving my bishop to capture her knight. What I hadn't anticipated was how good it would feel to have options again, to be making choices rather than having them made for me. That's the essence of dignity at any age, Helen observed, countering my move with an aggressive positioning of her queen. The ability to determine your own path within whatever constraints exist. Check, by the way. I laughed, refocusing on the chessboard. You're getting better at these distracting philosophical observations during critical game moments. Learning from the master, she retorted with a grin. You pulled the same trick last Thursday with that comment about existentialism, just as I was contemplating a crucial pawn advancement. Our banter continued throughout the game, which Helen eventually won through a clever combination I should have anticipated. As we reset the pieces, she asked, "Will you tell James about the apartment possibility?" I considered the question carefully. Yes, but as information, not as a request for approval or input. That distinction matters now. Indeed it does, she agreed. The relational patterns we establish in these transitions tend to persist. Better to be clear from the outset. The next morning, I emailed the property management company for the Pine Street apartments, requesting an application and additional information. By afternoon, I had received a comprehensive package and scheduled a virtual tour for the following week. I also emailed James, informing him directly about my medical progress and potential housing plans. Dr. Wilson confirms I'm on track for independent living by November. Exploring senior apartments on Pine Street in Pinewood. Happy to discuss. When we meet for coffee next week, but wanted you to be aware of developments. His response was brief but encouraging. Thanks for letting me know. Looking forward to hearing more details on Thursday. Sophie confirmed she'll join us. Over the next several days, I found myself increasingly engaged in forward-looking activities. I researched transportation options in Pinewood for seniors who no longer drive. I reviewed the floor plans repeatedly, mentally arranging my remaining furniture in the new space. I even began discreetly sorting through the possessions in my Golden Acres room, identifying what would make the transition to the apartment and what might be donated or passed along. You're nesting before you even have the nest, Helen observed, watching me organize my closet with meticulous attention one evening. Planning makes me feel productive, I admitted. And after months of reacting to circumstances thrust upon me, there's something deeply satisfying about initiating changes of my own choosing. I remember that feeling, she said thoughtfully. After my husband died, I spent nearly a year in a kind of suspended animation, responding to others' concerns, following suggestions, passive in my own life. Then one morning I woke up and thought, this isn't living, it's merely existing. That day I booked a trip to Italy I'd been postponing for decades, sold my too-large house the following month, never looked back. Italy sounds wonderful, I mused. I've never been to Europe. Harold always talked about taking me to London after retirement, but then his health declined so rapidly. Helen's eyes lit up. We should go. Next spring, perhaps. I'm an experienced traveler, you're getting stronger every day, and neither of us is getting any younger. Carpe diem, Dorothy. The spontaneous suggestion caught me by surprise. Not just the specific idea of European travel, but the implicit understanding that my life still contained possibilities for adventure, discovery, and new experiences. Somewhere in the trauma of being deposited at Golden Acres, I had unconsciously accepted a narrative of diminishment, of a life contracting rather than continuing to expand. Let's research options, I heard myself agreeing. Spring in London. Sounds perfect. Helen beamed. That's the spirit. We'll start planning next week. I have excellent resources from previous trips. The exchange left me thoughtful for the remainder of the evening. If I was willing to consider international travel with a friend I'd known for just months, what other possibilities might exist that I hadn't yet envisioned? What other artificial limitations had I internalized about what was appropriate or possible at my age? By the time I met James and Sophie for coffee the following Thursday, these questions had crystallized into a clearer understanding of what I wanted this next chapter of my life to embody: purpose, connection, growth, and autonomy. Not merely an epilogue of managed comfort, but a vital continuation filled with meaningful choices and new experiences. Sophie arrived first, greeting me with an enthusiasm that still surprised me after years of obligatory family interactions. "Grandma Dorothy," she exclaimed, hugging me with genuine warmth. I brought my portfolio and essay drafts, and guess what? Mr. Wilson offered me an internship position with the Arts Center Planning Committee. Official title and everything. It will look amazing on my college applications. That's wonderful news, I said sincerely, returning her hug. Charles mentioned he was impressed with your ideas for youth engagement programming. She practically glowed with the validation, reminding me how rarely her creative pursuits had been affirmed within the family. Before she could elaborate further, James arrived, looking more relaxed than during our previous meeting. "Sorry I'm late," he said, setting his phone on the table. Client call ran long. "No problem," I assured him. Sophie's been updating me on her Arts Center internship. James's expression held a mix of residual skepticism and newfound acceptance. Mr. Wilson called me personally about that. Very professional. The way he structured it. Real responsibilities, clear expectations, good experience regardless of her eventual career path. This acknowledgement, however qualified, represented significant progress in James's attitude toward Sophie's artistic interests. I caught my granddaughter's quick smile. She recognized the shift as well. Our conversation over the next hour flowed more naturally than I had dared hope. Sophie shared her college essay drafts, which centered on intergenerational understanding and the value of artistic expression in building community bridges. James discussed a community investment initiative his firm was developing that might align with the Arts Center's mission. I updated them both on my medical progress and the Pine Street apartment possibilities. "November seems fast," James commented, his tone concerned but not controlling. "Are you sure you'll be ready?" "Dr. Wilson believes so," I replied. "And the timing aligns well with the Arts Center's early development phase. I'd like to be involved as it takes shape." "The apartments look really nice," Sophie added, scrolling through photos I'd shared with her. "And you could walk to that cafe we like, the one with the good scones." "That's part of the appeal," I confirmed. maintaining independence while having support available if needed, the best of both worlds. James nodded thoughtfully. What about furniture and household items? I know we've been storing several pieces from the house. I've been making inventory lists, I told him. The apartment is approximately 800 square feet, sufficient for essential pieces but requiring thoughtful selection. Perhaps you and Sophie could help me finalize decisions once I have a confirmed move-in date? The request represented a deliberate invitation to participate appropriately rather than take over, a recalibration of family dynamics that James seemed to recognize and appreciate. Of course, he agreed. Just let us know when. As our meeting concluded and we prepared to depart, James hesitated, then asked, Would you consider joining us for dinner next Sunday? Nothing formal, just at the house. Patricia is. He paused, clearly choosing his words carefully, working to understand recent changes from her perspective. The invitation surprised me, particularly the implied willingness on Patricia's part to engage after the humiliation she'd experienced at the will reading. I'd like that, I said cautiously, though perhaps we should keep expectations modest for a first gathering. Absolutely, he agreed quickly. Small steps. Sophie looked between us, her expression hopeful but guarded. Mom's making lasagna, her non-terrible food. The slight joke broke the tension and I smiled. Lasagna sounds perfect. What time should I arrive? As I watched them walk away a few minutes later, James with his measured professional stride, Sophie with the loose-limbed energy of youth, I felt cautiously optimistic about this tentative family reconstruction. Not a return to previous patterns, which had been fundamentally unbalanced, but the potential creation of something new and healthier. Later that afternoon, during my therapy session at Pinewood Rehabilitation, my physical therapist commented on my improved performance on balance exercises. Whatever you're doing outside our sessions is working, she observed as I successfully navigated a challenging obstacle course. Your confidence in your movements has increased substantially. I suppose I'm finding my balance in more ways than one, I replied, realizing the truth of the statement even as I spoke it. 8 weeks earlier, I had been wheeled into Golden Acres on my birthday, physically injured and emotionally devastated, my autonomy stripped away by well-meaning but fundamentally misguided children. Today, I stood on my own feet, literally and figuratively, making choices, building new connections, and reimagining what the coming years might hold. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear or without potential complications. The dinner with Patricia loomed as a particular challenge. The logistics of the apartment move would require careful planning. The natural limitations of aging would continue to require adaptations and occasional assistance. But for the first time since that birthday that had seemed like an ending, I felt genuinely excited about beginnings. A new home in Pinewood, deepening relationships with Sophie and Helen, potential travel adventures, meaningful involvement with the Community Arts Center, and perhaps most importantly, a reconstructed sense of self that acknowledged both my limitations and my continuing capacity for growth, connection, and contribution. Golden Acres, intended as my final destination, had instead become a transformative way station, a place where I had reclaimed my voice, reasserted my autonomy, and rediscovered possibilities I had prematurely relinquished. Whatever came next would be shaped by choice rather than circumstance, by intention rather than imposition. As I completed the therapy session and prepared to return to Golden Acres, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for this unexpected journey. Not for the painful rupture that had initiated it, but for the clarity, strength, and self-knowledge that had emerged from navigating its challenges. The coming months would bring new tests and transitions, but I would meet them standing firmly, on my own 2 feet, sometimes with a cane for support, always with clear boundaries to protect my autonomy, and increasingly with the confidence that comes from having survived what was meant to diminish me and emerged more fully myself than before. Sunday dinner at James and Patricia's home loomed with both promise and apprehension. I selected my outfit carefully. A sage green dress with a light cardigan, pearl earrings that Harold had given me on our 20th anniversary, comfortable but stylish flats that accommodated my still recovering hip. Helen had insisted on helping with my hair, creating a style she claimed was dignified but not stuffy. "Remember, you're not arriving as a supplicant," she reminded me as I prepared to leave Golden Acres. "You're coming as an equal participant in the family dynamic, not as a dependent seeking approval." The transportation service arrived promptly at 4:30, giving me ample time to reach James and Patricia's home in Lakeshore Estates before the agreed-upon dinner time. As we approached their neighborhood, I noted the manicured lawns, imposing facades, and careful landscaping that characterized these high-end properties, physical manifestations of the success and status that Patricia had always prioritized. The driver helped me from the car, ensuring I had my cane firmly in hand before departing with a promise to return at 8. I took a steadying breath before approaching the front door, reminding myself of how far I had come since that birthday, when they had delivered me to Golden Acres without consultation. Sophie answered my knock immediately, as if she'd been waiting just inside. "Grandma Dorothy!" she exclaimed, her genuinely warm greeting easing some of my tension. "You look amazing. Come in. Dad's mixing drinks and Mom's actually being nice." To everyone. Her candid assessment made me smile. "Thank you, Sophie. That sounds promising." The house looked much as I remembered, though with subtle changes. New artwork in the foyer, different throw pillows in the living room, fresh flowers arranged precisely on the entry table. Patricia had always been attuned to home decor trends, updating regularly to maintain what she considered appropriate appearances. James emerged from the kitchen, looking surprisingly relaxed in casual weekend attire. "Mom, welcome. What can I get you to drink? We have wine, sparkling water, or I can make you a proper cocktail if you prefer." "Sparkling water would be perfect," I replied, accepting his kiss on my cheek, a gesture that felt both familiar and newly significant given recent events. Patricia appeared moments later, wearing an expression I couldn't quite decipher, something between determined civility and genuine discomfort. "Dorothy," she greeted me, her tone carefully neutral. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for having me," I responded with equal care. "Your home looks lovely, as always." An awkward silence threatened to descend until Sophie intervened. "Grandma, I want to show you my new paintings while Dad finishes the salad. They're in the den." Grateful for her intervention, I followed my granddaughter to the den, a room I had rarely entered during previous visits. What had once been a formal space clearly designed for business associates rather than family had been partially transformed. One wall now featured a large canvas in vibrant blues and greens, unmistakably Sophie's work. A desk in the corner held art supplies alongside college brochures. "Dad cleared this space for me," Sophie explained, noting my surprise. "Said I needed a proper area to work, not just my bedroom." "That's wonderful," I said sincerely, genuinely pleased by this tangible evidence of James's evolving attitude toward his daughter's artistic pursuits. "He's supporting your work." Sophie nodded, her expression a mixture of happiness and lingering caution. "Things have been different since. Everything. Dad and I actually talk now about real stuff. And Mom tries in her way. She still doesn't really get the art thing, but she stopped suggesting business school at every opportunity." Before I could respond, James called us to dinner. The dining room table was set with care, the good china, proper wine glasses, linen napkins, suggesting Patricia had approached this meal with her typical attention to presentation. "This looks lovely," I commented as James held my chair. "Sophie helped," Patricia said, a small but notable acknowledgement of her daughter's contribution. "She has an eye for table settings." Dinner proceeded with surprising ease. The conversation remained generally neutral. Sophie's upcoming school events, a community foundation gala James's firm was sponsoring, a new restaurant in Pinewood worth trying. No mention was made of the will, Golden Acres, or the tensions of recent months. It was only when Patricia served coffee and dessert, a homemade tiramisu that represented genuine effort on her part, that she finally broached more sensitive territory. "Dorothy," she began, her voice careful but direct, "I understand you're considering an apartment in Pinewood when you leave Golden Acres." "Yes," I confirmed, "on Pine Street. The location is ideal, and the design accommodates my needs while supporting independence." Patricia nodded slowly. "That sounds appropriate. If you need help with the transition, with organizing or decorating." She hesitated, then continued with what appeared to be sincere effort. "Well, I have experience with those things. I could assist if you'd like." The offer, however tentatively extended, represented a significant shift from her previous approach to my living arrangements. Not a unilateral decision imposed without consultation, but a resource offered for my consideration. "Thank you, Patricia," I said, acknowledging the effort this overture required. "I may take you up on that when the time comes. The apartment is smaller than my previous home, so some expertise in space optimization would be valuable." She seemed relieved by my response. "Of course, just let me know." James cleared his throat. "Mom, there's something else we wanted to discuss regarding Thanksgiving." I braced myself, wondering if another family exclusion was forthcoming. "We'd like to host it here," he continued. "You, of course, and also Sophie's friend Zoe, whose family is traveling that week. And we thought perhaps your friend Helen might enjoy joining us. Sophie mentioned you two have become close." The invitation caught me completely by surprise, not just its inclusivity, but the thoughtful consideration of my new friendships. "That's very kind," I managed. "I'm sure Helen would be delighted." "It's still 2 months away," Patricia added quickly, "but we wanted you to know that we're planning with you included. Unlike—" She trailed off, not quite able to explicitly acknowledge the previous Christmas exclusion. "I appreciate that," I said simply. As the evening drew to a close, James insisted on walking me to the transportation service vehicle when it arrived. On the front porch, away from Patricia and Sophie, he spoke with unexpected candor. "This isn't easy for any of us," he said quietly. "Changing established patterns, acknowledging mistakes, moving forward without pretending nothing happened." He looked directly at me, more vulnerable than I had seen him in years. "But it matters to me, rebuilding our relationship, finding a better way forward." "It matters to me too," I assured him, and tonight was a good beginning. The next morning, I met with the property manager for the Pine Street apartments, signing the lease agreement for a November 15th move-in date. The decision felt momentous, yet entirely right, a concrete commitment to my next chapter. "Congratulations, new neighbor," said a familiar voice behind me as I completed the paperwork. I turned to find Frank Thompson, my former neighbor from Maple Avenue, smiling broadly. "Frank, don't tell me you're moving to Pine Street too?" He nodded, looking pleased by my surprise. "Sold my place last month. Too much house for one person. I'm in Unit 212, just down the hall from your new place." The coincidence seemed too perfect. "Did Martin suggest these apartments to you as well?" Frank's expression turned slightly sheepish. "Actually, Dr. Wilson mentioned them. We've been seeing each other socially since the will reading. Nothing serious, just dinner occasionally. Interesting conversation. She thought I might appreciate the community developing there." "Lillian Wilson?" I clarified, delighted by this unexpected development. "My physician, Lillian." "The very same," he confirmed with a smile. "Remarkable woman. She speaks very highly of you, by the way." As autumn progressed, the pace of change accelerated. 3 days a week at Pinewood Rehabilitation became 4. each session showing measurable improvements. The Arts Center committees began formal planning, with Sophie proudly serving as the Youth Engagement Coordinator. Helen and I researched spring travel options, eventually booking a 2-week tour of England and Scotland for April. Most significantly, I graduated from the cane to unassisted walking for normal daily activities. "You've exceeded every expectation," Dr. Wilson told me during my final formal assessment. "I'd like to use your case as a model for recovery potential in patients your age." Golden Acres, which had initially represented confinement and loss of autonomy, gradually transformed in my mind to what it had actually been: a transitional space that, however poorly chosen, had facilitated important growth and new connections. As my departure date approached, I found myself feeling genuine gratitude for the staff who had supported my recovery and the residents who had become true friends. "You'd better not disappear once you're settled in Pinewood," Mabel warned during our final bridge game. "We expect regular visits and full reports on Arts Center developments." "And detailed travelogues from your European adventures with Helen," George added. "Some of us travel vicariously these days." "I promise," I assured them both. Golden Acres may not have been my choice, but the relationships formed here certainly were. The day before my scheduled move, Sophie arrived unexpectedly during afternoon visiting hours. "I have something to show you," she announced, pulling out her sketchbook. "It's my college application portfolio centerpiece." The drawing took my breath away, a multi-panel narrative illustration titled Reclamation. It depicted an elderly woman's journey from displacement to empowerment, from isolation to community, from resignation to renewal. Though the face wasn't explicitly mine, the emotional trajectory was unmistakably inspired by my experience. "It's about finding strength when others try to take your choices away," Sophie explained, watching my reaction carefully. "About rewriting the ending they tried to give you." "It's extraordinary," I told her truthfully, deeply moved by her perception and artistic translation of my journey. "Have your parents seen it?" She nodded. "Dad actually cried, though he tried to hide it, and Mom said it showed genuine artistic maturity, which from her is basically a standing ovation." On November 15th, exactly 4 months after being deposited at Golden Acres on my birthday, I walked unassisted through its doors for the final time. Not as a resident being discharged, but as a woman moving forward by choice. James, Sophie, and even Patricia had arrived early to help transport my belongings to the Pine Street apartment. Helen would join us there to assist with unpacking and arrangement. As James loaded the last of my bags into his car, I took a moment to say goodbye to the staff who had supported my recovery. Greta, my physical therapist, hugged me warmly. "You're our success story," she whispered, "the one who refused to let circumstances define her." The afternoon unfolded in a blur of activity, unpacking essential items, arranging furniture, organizing the kitchen. By evening, the apartment had taken shape as a space that honored both my past and my future. Harold's first editions occupied a prominent bookcase. The watercolor from my students brightened the hallway. New purchases, selected specifically for this new chapter, complemented cherished pieces from my previous home. As James, Patricia, and Sophie prepared to depart, leaving Helen and me to finish settling in, I found myself filled with unexpected emotion. "Thank you all for your help today," I said simply. Sophie hugged me impulsively. "Your place is perfect, Grandma Dorothy. I can't wait to visit for real, maybe stay overnight sometimes." "Anytime," I assured her. The sofa converts to a very comfortable bed. James embraced me next, the gesture more natural than it had been in years. "Welcome home, Mom," he said quietly. Patricia surprised me with a brief hug of her own. "I've ordered curtains for the bedroom," she said, characteristic in her practical approach to reconciliation. "They'll arrive next week. I think you'll find they complement the wall color nicely." After they departed, Helen and I sat in my new living room, glasses of wine in hand, surveying what we had accomplished. To new beginnings, she proposed, raising her glass. And unexpected journeys, I added. Later that evening, after Helen had returned to Golden Acres with a promise to visit again in days, I stood alone in my new space, absorbing the quietness and the profound sense of arrival. Not just physical arrival in this apartment, but arrival at a new understanding of myself and what remained possible in the years ahead. The birthday that had seemed to mark an ending had instead initiated a profound beginning. The nursing home, intended as my final destination, had become merely a way station. The will reading that my family had dreaded had cleared the path for more authentic relationships. The greatest wound had somehow yielded the most significant healing. As I prepared for my first night in my new home, I realized that the true gift of these challenging months had been reclaiming authorship of my own story, taking what others had tried to write for me and insisting on my right to create my own continuing chapters. Not as a dependent character in someone else's narrative, but as the protagonist of a life still unfolding in ways both challenging and beautiful. Tomorrow would bring new experiences, a planning meeting for the Art Center, lunch with Frank, and Dr. Wilson, a video call with Sophie about her college applications, each representing connections and purposes I couldn't have imagined when James and Patricia had wheeled me into Golden Acres just 4 months earlier. The path forward would undoubtedly hold more challenges, more adaptations, more letting go. But it would unfold according to choices made with intention and autonomy, shaped by my values rather than others' convenience, rich with relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or expectation. As I drifted toward sleep in my new bedroom, I felt profoundly grateful, not for having been placed in a nursing home on my birthday, but for having found within that painful displacement the catalyst for reclaiming my voice, my choices, and, ultimately, my future. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.